Section 1. The opening you never got. There is a version of The Simpsons that most people have never seen. It exists in the margins of the show we grew up with, in the pilot that aired before anyone was paying attention, in the network memos that tried to sand down its rougher edges, in the animator's early sketches that made the family look genuinely unsettling rather than warmly imperfect. It lives in the voice Matt Groening used when he described the show to Fox executives, a voice that was careful and a little evasive, because he knew that what he was actually making was not what he was telling them he was making. The Simpsons premiered on the 17th of December, 1989. It was a Sunday night. Most of America was watching something else. The episode was called Simpsons Roasting on an Open Fire. Homer doesn't get a Christmas bonus at work. He tries to hide this from his family. He takes a second job as a department store Santa Claus. He loses most of his paycheck at the racetrack. He brings home a greyhound dog instead of presents, and somehow, improbably, the family decides this counts as a good Christmas. If you describe that plot to someone who has never seen the show, they will probably assume it ends badly. A man lies to his family, fails at everything, and returns with something worthless. That sounds like a tragedy. And in a lot of ways it is, except that the show doesn't present it that way. The show presents it as warmth. Homer sitting in that sad Santa costume, watching a dog he can't afford run a race he has no reason to believe in, is one of the most quietly devastating images in the history of American television. But the music swells gently, and the family is happy, and you are supposed to feel okay. That tension between the bleakness underneath and the warmth on the surface is the entire show. It is not a mistake. It is not a contradiction. It is the thesis. Matt Groening grew up in Portland, Oregon, in a family that was, by his own description, chaotic, loving, and difficult in ways that are hard to articulate. His father was named Homer. His mother was named Marge. He had sisters named Lisa and Maggie. He named the family after his own family in a move that is either deeply autobiographical or a kind of protective camouflage. If everyone thinks it's just a joke, you never have to explain what it's really about. He had been making a comic strip called Life in Hell since the late 1970s. It was dark, existentially bleak, and very funny in a way that made you feel vaguely uncomfortable about why you were laughing. When James L. Brooks approached him about adapting Life in Hell for a television variety show, Groening declined to license his existing characters and instead sketched out the Simpsons family in the waiting room, supposedly in about 15 minutes. Supposedly on a napkin, though the mythologization of the origin story has always been part of the show's appeal. The early shorts that aired on the Tracy Ullman Show between 1987 and 1989 are remarkable for how different they feel from what the show would become. The animation was rougher, stranger, more expressionistic. Homer's face was almost feral. The family had a quality of barely contained menace that would be almost entirely smoothed away in the transition to a half-hour format. Watching them now feels like finding someone's private sketchbook, the real shapes of things, before the commercial process decided what was acceptable. The network wanted the show to be broader. Networks always want things to be broader. Broader means more people will watch it, and more people watching means more advertisers paying, and more advertisers paying means the show continues to exist. This is the fundamental bargain of commercial television, and it is a bargain that shapes every creative decision in ways that the people making the creative decisions are not always fully aware of. The Simpsons was, from the very beginning, a negotiation between what the creators wanted to say and what the network would allow. What is remarkable is not that the network won some of those negotiations, but that the creators won so many of them, and that the things they won, the darkness, the complexity, the willingness to let characters fail and stay failed, are the things that made the show genuinely great. James L. Brooks was the crucial buffer. His prestige and his reputation meant that Fox was reluctant to push too hard. When the network complained that an episode was too dark, Brooks could remind them of who they were talking to. This protection was real, and it mattered, and the show would have been significantly worse without it. But the darkness didn't come from any single protector. It came from the writer's room, which was stocked with people who had a particular relationship to comedy, people who understood that the funniest thing in the world is often the saddest thing in the world, just tilted slightly. George Meyer, who is widely considered one of the most influential writers on the show, has spoken in interviews about the philosophy that animated the best years of the series. that comedy should be a delivery system for truth, and that the truth worth delivering is usually uncomfortable. There is a line from the season 4 episode Homer's Triple Bypass that contains more honest emotion than most hour-long dramas manage in an entire season. Homer is about to have open-heart surgery, and he genuinely believes he might die. He sits on the edge of Bart's bed in the dark and says, quietly, that if something goes wrong at the hospital, he wants Bart to know he has always loved him. Bart doesn't know how to respond, because Bart never knows how to respond to sincerity. He has learned, from living in the world, that sincerity is dangerous. He makes a joke. Homer, who has spent his entire life protecting himself from real feeling with jokes, recognizes exactly what Bart is doing, and his face just holds. He understands. The conversation ends. Neither of them says what they meant. That scene takes about 45 seconds. It is, in its way, perfect. And it is in a comedy episode about a cartoon man getting heart surgery. This is what the show was doing from the very beginning, and what it continued to do through its best years. It was using the cartoon format, the comedy format, the family sitcom format, as permission to go places that would be unbearable in any other context. The animation creates a buffer. The jokes create a buffer. And behind those buffers, the show was examining the American family with a precision and a tenderness that has rarely been matched. The characters are based, in varying degrees, on real psychological types. Homer is the man who wanted more and settled for less, and has made a kind of peace with that, or believes he has, or tries to believe he has. Marge is the woman who chose a life over a self, and who grieves that choice so quietly that she has almost stopped noticing the grief. Bart is the child who has been failed by every institution that was supposed to help him, and has responded by refusing to trust any institution at all. Lisa is the person who sees everything clearly and is punished, socially, for the clarity. These are not cartoon characters. These are real types of people. You know these people. You may be one of these people. The show's first season is uneven in ways that are interesting to think about. It was figuring out what it was. The animation improved rapidly. The voice actors settled into their characters. The writers learned what the show could do and what it couldn't get away with. But even in the first season, even in the episodes that are clearly still finding their footing, there is something there, a quality of emotional honesty, a willingness to let things be sad, that the show never fully abandoned, even in its weakest years. Moaning Lisa is the 8th episode of the first season. Lisa is depressed. Not cartoon character depressed, actually depressed, in the way that children are sometimes actually depressed, for reasons that are real but hard to explain. She doesn't want to go to school. She doesn't want to eat. She sits in her room and plays sad music on her saxophone. And the show does something almost unheard of for a family sitcom. It doesn't fix it. It doesn't have a moment where Lisa realizes everything is okay. It has a moment where Marge tells Lisa that she should stop suppressing how she feels, and then the music plays, and Lisa smiles, and that's the ending, not because everything is better, but because feeling things is okay even when they don't get better. That is a deeply unusual message for a children's television program to deliver. That is a message many adults have trouble absorbing. The show knew from very early on what it was about. It was about the distance between the life you imagined and the life you got. It was about the love that survives that distance, and sometimes doesn't. It was about the American middle class in the late 20th century, which is to say it was about a particular kind of quiet desperation that presented itself as contentment, because what else were you going to do? Springfield is not a real place, but it is more real than most real places on television, because it was built from the observation of actual life rather than the conventions of storytelling. The gas station and the nuclear plant and the bar and the elementary school and the church and the police station, these are the institutions that structure a working-class American life, and the show treats them with the eye of someone who grew up inside those institutions and carries them in their body. The first season ends with an episode called Some Enchanted Evening. Homer and Marge go on a date while a babysitter watches the kids. The babysitter turns out to be a wanted criminal. The kids watch television instead of alerting anyone. Marge and Homer come home and everything is fine. And Homer says something kind to Marge about how she is the most beautiful woman he has ever seen. It is a strange, low-key ending to a season that was figuring out its own grammar. But the thing that sticks is Homer's sincerity. He means it. He genuinely means it. And the show doesn't make a joke of that. It just lets it sit there, warm and a little awkward, the way real feeling usually is. That is The Simpsons. That is what it was from the beginning. A comedy that was always, underneath, something more like a love story about a family, about a country, about the way human beings keep trying to be kind to each other, even when everything else is falling apart. The show had to fight to be what it was. The network wanted brighter colors, broader jokes, simpler resolutions. The writers pushed back. The result, across those first several seasons, was something that felt genuinely unlikely a show that worked as entertainment at multiple levels simultaneously. You could watch it as a child and find the physical comedy and the voices and the slapstick exactly as satisfying as any cartoon. You could watch it as a teenager and find the cultural references and the subversive humor exactly as rewarding as any satire. You could watch it as an adult and find the emotional honesty, the portraits of marriage and parenting and work and friendship, exactly as accurate as any drama. Very few things work at all three levels at once. The Simpsons, in its best years, did it every week. The voice cast deserves attention here because the voices are not incidental to what the show is. Dan Castellaneta's Homer is one of the great vocal performances in American entertainment, the specific warmth and carelessness and occasional pain of that voice, the way it can carry a joke and then, in the next breath, carry something much heavier, is a tool the show used with remarkable craft. Julie Kavner's Marge has a quality of controlled emotion in it. The voice itself sounds like someone managing a great deal of feeling very carefully, which is exactly what Marge is doing at all times. Nancy Cartwright's Bart is street and bravado, and, underneath those, something younger and more frightened. Yeardley Smith's Lisa sounds like intelligence and earnestness at war with loneliness, which is exactly right. These are not simply performances. They are complete imaginative propositions about who these people are, sustained across decades, refined and deepened as the actors found new ways into the characters. The voices are the characters, in a way that is unusual even for animated shows. The show's relationship to its own cultural moment is also worth noting. It premiered in 1989, which was a very specific historical moment. The Reagan era had ended. The sense of post-war American optimism, the sense that economic growth was permanent and upward mobility was guaranteed, and the middle class was a stable destination rather than an ongoing struggle was beginning to show. Serious cracks. The plant closings were starting. The debt was accumulating. The specific kind of working-class stability that Homer Simpson's life represented was already, in 1989, more precarious than it looked. The Simpsons was a show about that precariousness, dressed up as a comedy, in a form that allowed people to laugh at the anxiety rather than simply feeling it. This is what comedy has always been for, at its most useful. Not the avoidance of difficult feeling, but the management of it. You can laugh at Homer's failures because they're not your failures, and then you go home and they sort of are your failures. And somehow having laughed at them makes them more bearable. That exchange, the show giving you the distance of comedy in order to let you feel the thing underneath the comedy, is the transaction that the Golden Age got exactly right. It is what the show was designed to do, from the very beginning, by people who understood that it was possible to tell the truth in a cartoon if you were willing to be honest about what the truth looked like. And the truth, as The Simpsons told it, was this: ordinary life is harder than it should be, and the people in it are more complicated than they appear, and love persists through the difficulty in ways that are not always pretty, but are always real. That's the whole show. Everything else, the jokes, the celebrity cameos, the sight gags, the elaborate parody sequences, everything else is in service of that. This was the show that existed before the internet wrote think pieces about it, before the anniversary specials and the discourse about decline and the endless ranking articles, before it became a cultural institution and started to feel like furniture. In the beginning, it was just something on Sunday nights that was stranger and darker and more honest than anything else on television. And the audience responded to that honesty in ways that surprised everyone, including the people making it. They had made something that felt true. That was the gift. And the gift was real, and no amount of later seasons diminishes it. If you're still here, and I'm glad you are, drop a comment wherever you're watching this from. Tell me your city and what time it is there. Something about knowing someone in a completely different place is settling into the same story right now is something I find genuinely comforting. And if you want more like this, subscribing means you'll be there the next time we go somewhere like this together. Now, let's keep going. Section 2. The Weight Homer Carries. There is a moment in the Season 2 episode, The Way We was a flashback episode, set in 1974, showing how Homer and Marge met in high school, where a young Homer Simpson sees Marge Bouvier for the first time across a crowded detention room, and his face does something that the animators clearly understood was the whole point of the scene. It goes soft. The brashness drops away. The boy who has been performing loudness and confidence as a survival strategy just stops performing for a moment because he has seen something that makes performance feel unnecessary. He is 17 years old. He will spend the next several years pursuing Marge with a determination that looks like romantic comedy from the outside, but is, if you read it carefully, something closer to desperation. Homer Simpson, even at 17, is a person who senses that he is going to be limited by forces he cannot control, and that love, real love, the transformative kind, might be the one thing that makes those limits bearable. This is the Homer Simpson the show built everything on. Not the buffoonish father who strangles his son for laughs. Not the hapless fool who falls off every roof and into every ditch. Those versions of Homer are real, and they are often genuinely funny, and they serve a purpose. They make the character safe to love from a distance, safe to laugh at, because if you can laugh at someone, you don't have to feel for them. But underneath the pratfalls and the obsessive eating and the spectacular carelessness, there has always been a man carrying something very heavy. The weight has a specific shape. It is made of several things stacked on top of each other, each one real, each one bearing on his life in ways he mostly cannot see clearly but can always feel. The first thing is his father. Abraham Simpson, Abe, Grandpa, the old man at the retirement home who talks too much and is mostly not listened to, is one of the most quietly tragic characters in the history of the show. He is a man who was, once, vital. He served in a war. He had opinions that mattered, to him and perhaps to others. He had a wife, and then he didn't. And the losing of her is something he returns to again and again, in ways that suggest it never fully healed. His relationship with Homer is the wound at the center of Homer's character, and it is barely ever addressed directly, which is exactly the right choice. Homer's relationship with his father is characterized by a kind of numb affection, crossed with genuine resentment, crossed with guilt about the resentment. Abe was not, by most accounts gathered across the series, a particularly good father. He was absent in ways that mattered. He was critical in ways that cost Homer something. In one of the flashback episodes, we see Abe tell a young Homer he's a disappointment, not in a climactic, dramatic scene, but almost casually, the way you might tell someone their coffee is cold. As if it is simply a fact to be noted. Homer heard that. Somewhere inside the adult Homer, the kid who heard that is still sitting with it. What makes this especially resonant is the way the show depicts Homer's relationship with his own children in light of this inheritance. He is often exactly as inadequate as a parent as Abe was. He loses his temper. He says the wrong thing. He gets distracted at crucial moments. He misses things that matter. But the difference, and the show is careful to maintain this difference, is that Homer knows he's doing these things wrong. He registers his failures. He feels them, sometimes acutely, and tries to correct them, imperfectly, too late, in ways that are often fumbling but are never indifferent. Abe didn't seem to know, or didn't seem to care. The distance between those two positions is the distance between Homer and his father, and it is the show's most sustained argument that people are not simply destined to repeat the patterns they were raised inside. The cycle can be interrupted, if only partially, if only by degrees, if only by the difference between a father who doesn't notice and a father who notices and cannot quite fix it. The second thing Homer carries is Mona. Homer's mother left when he was around 9 years old. The show waited until season 7 to address this directly, in an episode called Mother Simpson, and the episode is widely considered one of the greatest the show ever produced and one of the saddest. We learn that Mona Simpson didn't abandon her son. She was forced to flee after becoming involved in anti-war activism that led to a confrontation with Mr. Burns. She has been living in hiding for decades. Homer finds her, they have a few days together, and then she has to leave again. The final scene of that episode is Homer sitting on the hood of his car, looking up at the stars, long after his mother's car has disappeared down the road. There is no joke. There is no resolution. The scene just holds on Homer's face as he looks up at a sky that does not answer him. And then the credits roll, quietly, over that same image. The writers made a deliberate decision not to end that episode with a punchline. It was a significant decision. The show had built its grammar around the punchline, around the moment where the tension is relieved by something funny, and to withhold that was a statement. Some things are not funny. Some things are just what they are. A man whose mother left him when he was 9, who got her back for a few days after 30 years, and then lost her again, that is not funny. That is just sad. And the show knew it, and it let it be sad. The absence of Mona organized Homer's entire childhood and continues to organize his adult emotional life in ways he cannot easily name. His desperate need for approval from his boss, from his neighbors, from strangers, from anyone, is the legacy of a child who woke up one morning and found the primary source of approval in his world was gone. His terror of abandonment, which plays out as clinginess toward Marge and a near panic at any sign that she might leave him, is the same thing. His willingness to endure humiliation from Burns rather than risk his job is part of the same structure. Losing the job would mean losing the family, would mean being alone. And being alone is the original wound. The third thing Homer carries is his own assessment of himself. Homer Simpson believes at some level that he is the sum of his failures. He knows he is not particularly smart. He knows he is not particularly successful. He knows that the safety inspector role he lucked into and nearly lost multiple times is the ceiling of his professional achievement. He knows that his house needs repairs he hasn't made. He knows that his children are smarter than he is, in ways that make him proud and ashamed in equal measure. What makes Homer interesting, genuinely, literarily interesting, is the way the show depicts his response to this self-knowledge. Most sitcom characters are insulated from real self-knowledge. Their flaws are the source of comedy, but are never really felt. Homer's flaws are felt. There are episodes where you can see him register, in real time, the gap between who he wanted to be and who he is. The expression the animators give him in those moments, a kind of heavy-lidded, resigned recognition, is one of the most carefully observed emotional gestures in the series. And then, sometimes, he overcomes it. Not in the triumphant way of a traditional hero, in the quiet, sideways way of someone who has decided that the overcoming is worth doing even without an audience. The Season 3 episode Dead Putting Society is about a miniature golf competition. Homer, motivated by a bet with Ned Flanders, pushes Bart hard to win. The pressure he puts on Bart is excessive and harmful in ways that Homer doesn't quite recognize until too late. The episode should end with Homer learning a lesson, doing something redemptive, making it right. And he does sort of. He has to mow Ned's lawn in Marge's dress as part of the bet he lost. He does it. He shows up and he does it. Awkward and humiliated and completely visible to his neighbors. And the thing is, he does it without complaint. Because he made a bet and he lost, and a deal is a deal. That's the redemption. Not a speech, not a hug. A man mowing a lawn in a dress because he said he would, and he's going to follow through on what he said. There's something genuinely honorable in that, buried under the comedy, and the show knows it. Homer's relationship with Bart is one of the great parent-child relationships in American fiction, and it is great precisely because it is so uncomfortable. Homer strangles Bart. This is a recurring bit. It is a joke. It is also a depiction of something real. The loss of control that happens when a parent is pushed beyond their capacity. The physical expression of a frustration that has no other outlet. The show frames it as comedy, and it is comedy, and it is also something that a lot of children recognized when they watched it and didn't have the words for what they recognized. The episodes where Homer and Bart connect genuinely, where the wall between them comes down, are some of the most moving in the series. Bart Gets an F is the second episode of Season 2, and it is an episode where Bart fails a test for the 4th time and has to repeat the 4th grade. He studies, genuinely and desperately, for the first time. He fails anyway, by 1 point. He starts to cry, and then Homer hugs him, and the moment is real in a way that a lesser show would not have dared. Homer doesn't say anything wise. He just holds his son, and his son cries, and that is the whole scene. There is also the matter of Homer's inner life, which the show takes seriously in ways that can be easy to miss. In El Viaje Misterioso de Nuestro Homer, Homer eats a super hot chili pepper and has a hallucinatory vision quest in which a spirit coyote voiced by Johnny Cash tells him he must find his soulmate. Homer doesn't understand what this means at first. He has already found his soulmate, he married her, but the episode is about his need for her to be something more than a domestic partner. His need for her to know him, actually know him, the way we all desperately want to be known. The episode ends with Marge and Homer on the roof watching the sunrise, and Homer saying quietly that she is his soulmate. It is sentimental, and it is earned, because the episode spent 20 minutes showing you exactly why it needed to be said. Homer needed to say it. Not for Marge's benefit, for his own. What the show never stops doing, through all its seasons and all its fluctuations in quality, is insisting that Homer's inner life is real and worth attending to. The man who drinks too much, and eats too much, and watches too much television, and shouts too often, that man has a rich, complicated, grieving interiority, and the show treats that interiority with respect. This is what makes Homer a genuinely great character, underneath all the comedy. Not the stupidity, not the clumsiness, not the explosions and the falls and the food obsession. What makes Homer great is the grief he carries quietly, and the love he manages to sustain anyway. Those two things together, the weight and the warmth, are what the show was always really about. Homer's relationship with his job is another layer of this weight. He works at a nuclear plant under the thumb of a man who actively despises him. Mr. Burns does not see Homer as a person. Burns sees Homer as a unit of labor, interchangeable, replaceable, not worth the bother of learning the name. There is an episode where Burns confesses that he doesn't know Homer's name, despite Homer having worked for him for years. This is played for laughs. It is also the precise texture of a certain kind of working life. The life where you give your days and your energy to an institution that will never return the regard. Homer has made a kind of peace with this. He sits in his safety inspector's chair, and he does the job, and he drinks the coffee, and he goes home. The job is not his identity. This is, in a way, psychologically healthy. Finding your identity in work that doesn't deserve it is its own kind of trap, but it's also a loss. Homer wanted things when he was young. He had dreams. The specifics change across the series at various points. We learn he wanted to be a musician, an astronaut, a chef, and the show is careful to give him, in various one-off episodes, access to those dreams. He gets to go to space. He forms a barbershop quartet. He writes a children's book. And then the episode ends, and he is back at the plant, back at the chair, back at the coffee. The reset that defines a sitcom's format becomes, in The Simpsons, something philosophically interesting. Every episode, Homer reaches something or fails at something, and then returns to baseline. The show never lets him accumulate growth in a traditional narrative sense. And yet he does grow, not in his circumstances, but in our understanding of him. Each episode adds something to the portrait. Each small failure and small triumph deepens the figure. By the end of the Golden Age, Homer Simpson is one of the most fully realized characters in American popular culture, assembled from hundreds of small pieces into something coherent and strange and human. The most honest thing the show ever says about Homer comes in an episode where he is asked what he wants from life, and he thinks about it seriously for a moment, and then says something to the effect that he just wants his family to be happy and to have a little peace. That's it. Not success, not recognition, not the reversal of all his failures, just peace. That's a man who has lived enough to know what matters. That's a man who has been carrying weight long enough to know that what you really want, in the end, is to put it down. And Springfield, with all its chaos and its impossible physics and its reset button logic, is the place where he gets to put it down, week after week, for a few minutes at a time. There is also the crayon. The show reveals, in Season 12, that Homer once had a crayon lodged in his brain since childhood that was suppressing his intelligence. When a doctor removes it, Homer's IQ rises dramatically. He becomes articulate, capable of complex thought, able to understand the systems around him in ways he never could before. He sees Burns for what he is. He sees his job for what it is. He sees Springfield for what it is. And it makes him miserable. Because seeing clearly in Springfield means seeing the machinery of your own limitation. It means understanding exactly how and why your life has the shape it has, and that understanding offers no comfort and no exit. Homer, with the crayon out, is a man who knows too much to be happy in the life he's been given. He chooses to put the crayon back in. He chooses the fog. The show presents this as a comic beat, and then, almost immediately, as something devastating. Homer's choice is the choice of a man who has decided that the small happiness available to him inside his limitations is worth more than the clarity that would make those limitations unbearable. It is not a stupid choice. It is not even a wrong choice, necessarily. It is the choice of a person who has correctly assessed his options and chosen the one that allows him to keep being present for the people he loves. He loves them more than he loves the truth about his own life. The show finds this heartbreaking and correct. And somewhere in that combination, heartbreaking and correct, is the whole of Homer Simpson in a single sentence. Section 3. Marge's Invisible Prison. Marge Simpson makes everything work. This is the premise of the household, the unspoken contract that every member of the family benefits from and none of them fully acknowledges. The breakfast is on the table. The laundry is done. The school forms are signed. The feelings are managed, not just her own feelings, but everyone else's. The invisible labor of emotional maintenance that involves tracking who is upset and why, and who needs to be approached gently today, and who needs to be left alone, and which conflicts are about to ignite and can be preemptively smothered. All of this work is Marge's work. The show knows it is Marge's work. The show, to its credit, makes this visible in ways that most television of its era did not bother to do. But the making visible is complicated by the fact that the show also needs Marge to keep doing the work she is, functionally, the stable center around which the chaos of the other four characters revolves. And so the critique of her situation is always partial, always hedged, always in tension with the structural need for her to remain in it. Marge was born Marge Bouvier. She was, in high school, a person with specific ambitions that had nothing to do with domesticity. She wanted to be a journalist. She was good at writing the show, tells us this across several episodes, shows us the evidence of a genuine capability that she never developed into anything. She was politically engaged, curious about the world, someone who had opinions and wasn't afraid of them. You can see traces of this person in the grown-up Marge, the way she engages with community issues, the way she sometimes speaks with sudden precision about something she cares about. But those traces are exactly that. Traces, remnants, the archaeological evidence of a self that got buried under the years of making things work. She chose Homer. That choice is presented, in the romantic episodes, as the obvious right choice. Homer is lovable. Homer loves her completely. Homer needs her in ways that feel good to be needed. But the show, to its credit, occasionally surfaces the cost of that choice. Not in dramatic speeches, but in small, revealing moments. The look on Marge's face when she sees someone her age doing something she imagined for herself, the way she trails off in mid-sentence when she's about to say something that would open too much up. Fear of Flying is a Season 6 episode that deserves more attention than it usually gets. Marge develops a fear of flying that turns out to be rooted in a repressed childhood memory. In therapy, she sees a therapist played by Anne Bancroft. In one of the show's great guest casting choices, she begins to excavate this. The episode is played mostly as comedy, but there is a scene late in it where Marge sits in the therapist's office and starts to say something and then stops herself, because saying it would mean admitting it, and admitting it would mean having to decide what to do with it. The therapist waits. Marge waits. The moment stretches. Nothing gets resolved in that episode in any deep sense. The fear of flying is addressed. The deeper thing, the accumulated cost of living a life in which her own needs and desires are perpetually secondary, is gestured at, and then the episode ends. This is both realistic and frustrating. It is realistic because that is how it works in actual life. You catch a glimpse of the thing you've been avoiding, and then you close the door again. Because opening it fully is too frightening. It is frustrating because the show keeps coming back to the door and refusing to open it, episode after episode, for decades. The episodes in which Marge pursues something for herself follow a consistent structural pattern that is itself revealing. Marge discovers a talent or desire. She pursues it with surprising competence. The show is always careful to establish that Marge is genuinely good at whatever she turns her hand to. She meets some success. And then something happens that requires her to choose between her own success and the needs of her family, and she chooses her family. The end. The episode is over. Her passion is set aside, and the next episode she is back at the stove. She becomes a painter in Brush with Greatness. Her paintings are genuine. There is real feeling in them, real skill. A collector notices. She has a show. But the episode ultimately becomes about Homer's insecurity about being painted, and Marge's resolution of his insecurity is more central to the ending than any recognition of her own achievement. She becomes a police officer in the Springfield connection. She is good at it, more naturally suited to it than she might have expected, which is the show acknowledging that domestic competence and professional competence are not as different as people like to pretend. But Homer's discomfort with her authority, and with the inversion of their usual dynamic, is treated as the emotional center of the episode. Marge quits, eventually. Homer gets what he needed. This pattern, repeated across the series, is not an accident. It is the show working through its own ambivalence about the character it had built. Marge is a feminist critique of domestic ideology packaged inside a show that cannot ultimately escape domestic ideology, because the show needs Marge in the kitchen to work as a family comedy. The writers, many of them, across the years, clearly understood this. Many of the Marge episodes feel like genuine attempts to reckon with it. None of them fully succeed, because the format won't allow full success. What they do succeed in, though, is making Marge's dissatisfaction visible. The show gives Marge an inner life that is not fully legible to the people around her, and that inner life includes a grief that is specific and ongoing. She does not regret her family. She loves her family. But there is something she gave up that she has not fully processed giving up, and the traces of it surface in unexpected ways. There is a quality to Marge's composure that the show gets exactly right. She is composed not because she is untroubled, but because composure is the skill she has spent her whole adult life developing. Keeping her voice even, keeping her smile present, keeping the family's emotional atmosphere navigable. This is not the absence of feeling, it is a very demanding form of feeling management, and it costs something. Her relationship with Homer is genuinely loving, and the show is honest about the complications of that love. She chose him. She continues to choose him. She sees him clearly, the laziness, the selfishness, the spectacular capacity for getting things wrong, and she remains. This is not martyrdom. It is a considered position, arrived at over years, about what matters and what is worth maintaining. But the show also allows her moments of genuine resentment that don't get neatly resolved. In Secrets of a Successful Marriage, Homer teaches a marriage education class and, in a desperate attempt to keep his students interested, reveals intimate details of his marriage, including things that should have stayed private, things that show his wife in moments of vulnerability she shared only with him. Marge's anger when she finds out is real and is allowed to be real. She leaves him. She does not immediately forgive. The episode takes her seriously. Marge's friendship network tells you a lot about her situation. Her primary confidant is Helen Lovejoy, the minister's wife, who is fundamentally interested in social performance rather than genuine connection. Her other social contacts, the other mothers, the church group, the PTA, are similarly mediated by role rather than intimacy. Marge does not have a friend who knows her, truly, the way Homer in his best moments knows her. She has acquaintances and she has roles. There is one friendship that the show treats differently, and it is with Ruth Powers, a neighbor who appears in 2 episodes. Ruth is newly divorced, living alone, clearly someone who made a different set of choices and is carrying a different set of costs. The friendship between Marge and Ruth has an electrical quality like meeting someone who is living out the road not taken. In Marge on the Lam, they go on an impulsive night out, and the episode captures something about the specific relief of being with someone who is not depending on you, even temporarily, even just for one night. The hair is relevant here. Marge's tower of blue hair is, within the logic of the show, something she maintains with extreme effort. We learn, in various episodes, that the hair would drop to floor level if not for the constant work of keeping it up. This is played as a joke, but it is a joke with a clear symbolic register. Marge's most visible feature, the thing everyone knows her by, is something that requires constant invisible maintenance and would collapse the moment she stopped working on it. You could teach a whole course on that detail. What The Simpsons understood about Marge is that the life of the household manager is a full and complex life, not a smaller or simpler version of other lives. Marge is not less than her circumstances. She is fully present inside them. But the show also refuses to pretend that the circumstances don't cost anything. The cost is real. The woman paying it is paying it consciously. That combination of clarity and endurance is, in its way, as complex a portrait of human experience as the show offers. She is not the funniest member of the family. She is not the most dramatic. She is not the one the clips and the essays and the retrospectives tend to focus on, but she is in many ways the one who makes the show mean what it means. Without Marge's grounded, costly, clear-eyed love at the center, the chaos around her is just chaos. With her there, it is something like a family. Section 4. Bart's Real Sadness. The world decided very early in the show's run what Bart Simpson meant. He was the id, the chaos principle, the little anarchist with a skateboard and a catchphrase. He was the bad influence that parents worried about and kids adored. He was the thing you bought on a t-shirt in 1990 and wore to a school that had banned those shirts, which was the whole point. George H. W. Bush famously said that America needed to be more like the Waltons and less like the Simpsons, which was the greatest marketing gift the show ever received, and probably contributed significantly to its ratings in those early years. This is not what Bart is. Or rather, this is the surface of Bart, the presentation, the defense. Underneath it is something the show returns to, again and again, with a care that the cultural conversation around the character almost entirely missed. Bart Simpson is a child in pain, and nobody in his world knows what to do about it. He is 10 years old when the series begins, and he has already arrived at a set of conclusions about himself and the world that will take decades to undo, if they are undone at all. He is not smart, this is what he has been told, and has internalized. He is a troublemaker. He is not a good student. He is the kind of kid who ends up in detention, in the principal's office, in the guidance counselor's waiting room. He has been sorted into the category of problem, and the institutional machinery has arranged itself around the assumption that this is what he is. The school's response to Bart is one of the most sustained institutional critiques in the series. Springfield Elementary is presented as a system designed, whatever its stated intentions, to sort children rather than educate them. Principal Skinner is a man who loves the idea of order more than he loves children. Mrs. Krabappel, Bart's perpetual fourth-grade teacher, is a woman who has been broken by years of working in a system that values compliance over actual development and who takes out the residue of that breaking on the students she was supposed to serve. Bart is not in the wrong class. The whole system is the wrong class for him. He learns through action and risk and social connection, not through sitting still and absorbing information from a person standing at a blackboard. In a different school, with different resources, and a different theory of childhood, Bart might have been identified as someone with particular needs and particular gifts. In Springfield Elementary, he is identified as a problem to be managed. The show is clear about this, if you pay attention. When Bart is genuinely engaged, when something catches his real interest, he applies himself with remarkable focus and competence. He is a natural performer. He has social intelligence of a very high order. He can read situations and people with an accuracy that most adults would envy. But none of these capabilities are legible to the system processing him, because they're not on the test. Bart gets an F. The Season 2 episode is structured around this gap. Bart fails a test despite genuine effort. When he starts to cry, genuinely cry, not performatively, it is the cry of someone who tried, this time, really tried, and it wasn't enough anyway. And Homer's response, the unexpected hug, is the most important thing that happens in the episode. Someone sees Bart trying and holds him for it, even though it didn't result in success. This is not nothing. In a life that is mostly characterized by adults responding to failure with frustration, being held for trying is something real and rare. Bart's relationship with his father is the engine of a significant portion of his emotional life. Homer loves Bart. This is not in question. But Homer's love is often expressed as expectation and sometimes as control, and Bart, who has developed an acute sensitivity to the difference between being loved and being managed, registers the distinction even when he can't articulate it. Milhouse Van Houten is Bart's best friend, and the friendship is one of the show's genuinely tender relationships. Milhouse is a child who is, in some ways, more obviously damaged than Bart. His parents' marriage is visibly failing. He is bullied. He has no social armor whatsoever, but his devotion to Bart is complete and real. He is there for all of it. The bad ideas, the schemes that go wrong, the times Bart needs someone to run alongside him into the thing he's already decided to do, Milhouse is always there. The show is careful. in its better episodes, not to let Bart take Milhouse for granted too completely. There are episodes where Bart's treatment of Milhouse is the thing that needs to be examined, where Bart's tendency to use people's affection as a resource is turned inward and made uncomfortable. These episodes work because they are not comfortable. They don't let Bart off the hook by simply having him apologize at the end. They make the dynamic legible and let it sit there, unresolved, because that is how real friendships actually work. What Bart is defending against, underneath all the performance and the bravado and the catchphrases, is the belief that he is essentially unlovable, or rather, that whatever there is in him that is worth loving is not visible to the systems and people that have authority over his life. The school doesn't see it. His teachers don't see it. His father only intermittently sees it, and even then has trouble sustaining the seeing. The people who see Bart clearly tend to be unexpected. Sideshow Bob, his original fan-turned-nemesis, who loves Bart's intelligence even while trying to kill him. The various characters who appear in Bart's life and reflect his capabilities back to him in ways that the regular characters don't. These moments of recognition are brief and often strange, but they matter enormously to who Bart is. There is something in Bart's rejection of authority that is not simply destruction for its own sake. It is a principled, if inarticulate, resistance to systems he has correctly identified as hostile to him. He knows, at a cellular level, that the institutions surrounding him are not designed for his benefit. He is right about this. His response sustained. Theatrical, determined non-compliance is not ideal, but it is not irrational. It is the response of a person who has run the numbers and decided that cooperation with systems designed to marginalize you is a bad deal. The tragedy is that this refusal, however understandable, also costs him. The things he needs, skills, credentials, social legibility in wider contexts, are mostly gatekept by the institutions he has decided to war against. He is caught in a trap of his own correct perceptions. By the end of Bart Gets an F, having failed the test and been held by his father, Bart asks his teacher if he can write something extra on his test paper. He writes a sentence about what he learned about the historical period the test covered that demonstrates genuine understanding. Mrs. Crabapple gives him the extra point. He passes by 1 point. And the moment where he cries, this time with relief, is the same kind of crying as the crying when he thought he had failed. It's the same Bart in both moments. The Bart who was trying all along. That is the Bart the show knows and protects. Not the anarchist on the t-shirt, the kid who was trying. Section 5. Lisa and the loneliness of being right. Lisa Simpson is 8 years old, and she is alone in a way that most adults would not survive. She is a second grader at Springfield Elementary. She plays the saxophone. She reads books that are beyond her grade level by a significant margin. She has opinions about literature, about ethics, about environmental policy, about the treatment of animals, about the structure of institutional power, about the particular way that Springfield's civic culture has calcified around self-interest dressed up as tradition. She has these opinions while being 8 years old, and she is right about most of them, and she is lonely in the way that being right consistently and publicly tends to make a person. There is a specific kind of loneliness that comes from seeing things clearly when the people around you don't want things to be seen clearly. It is different from the loneliness of shyness, or the loneliness of social anxiety, or the loneliness of not knowing how to connect. Lisa knows how to connect. She is warm, she is interested in other people, she genuinely wants to be with people. The problem is that genuine connection requires a degree of honest exchange, and Lisa's honest exchanges tend to include observations about reality that people find destabilizing. Lisa's substitute from Season 2 is the episode that established what Lisa's storyline in the series was going to be about. A substitute teacher named Mr. Bergstrom arrives while her regular teacher is out. He is played by Dustin Hoffman under a pseudonym. Hoffman reportedly did the work as a favor, asking for no credit, which says something about his estimation of the material. Mr. Bergstrom is everything Lisa has been waiting for. He takes her seriously. He engages with her intelligence directly, without condescension. He makes her feel, for the duration of his time in the class, that her way of seeing the world is valuable rather than inconvenient. He leaves, of course. He has to leave. He is a substitute. The episode knows what it is doing with this. The person who finally sees Lisa is, by definition, temporary, because the world that Springfield Elementary represents is not designed to accommodate someone like her. He leaves her a note before he goes. It says, "You are Lisa Simpson." That is all it says. She reads it when she is at her lowest, and it's enough. Barely, but enough. The note works because Lisa has a specific fear that the show understands and treats seriously. The fear that who she is, not what she does, not what she achieves, but who she fundamentally is not enough. That her intelligence and her passion and her moral seriousness are problems to be managed rather than gifts to be developed. The note says, "You are the you that you already are, and that is sufficient. You don't have to become something else." Lisa's relationship with intellectual life is presented by the show as a form of genuine love. She loves ideas the way other characters love people, with the same intensity and the same vulnerability. When the show gives her access to ideas that excite her, she lights up in a way that is unmistakably real. And when those ideas are dismissed, or when she is made to feel that her enthusiasm is inappropriate, she deflates in a way that is equally real. The loneliness is not just social. It is also the specific loneliness of knowing that you care about something: climate change, animal welfare, electoral politics, the future of the democracy that the people around you find it easier not to care about. Lisa's political awakening is treated by the show with a complexity that is genuinely unusual for a network cartoon. She is not simply right about everything. She is often right about the fundamental issue while wrong about specific tactics. She is occasionally self-righteous in ways the show acknowledges without endorsing, but the show never abandons her position that the things she cares about are things worth caring about. Her relationship with her father is tender and painful in roughly equal measure. Homer loves Lisa completely. She is, in some ways, the child he understands least but is most in awe of. He cannot follow her intellectually. He cannot track the references she makes or the arguments she constructs. But he responds to the feeling underneath them, the urgency, the caring, and in his better moments he shows up for that feeling even when he can't match it. Lisa's Pony, a Season 3 episode, is about Homer realizing, in the middle of the night, that he has forgotten something important to Lisa, and driving across town at 3 a.m. to fix it. He is not trying to be a good parent in any conscious way. He is just suddenly, vividly aware that he has disappointed someone he loves, and he moves. No fanfare, no speech, he just goes and does the thing. And Lisa, who has largely given up on expecting this from him, sees that he did it, and it matters to her in a way that nothing else in the episode really reaches. Her relationship with Bart is one of the most honest sibling dynamics in television. They genuinely dislike each other in the way that siblings genuinely dislike each other, not with hatred, but with a specific, intimate, deep-rooted irritation that comes from being forced to share space with someone who is almost your opposite in every relevant respect. Bart finds Lisa's earnestness insufferable. Lisa finds Bart's deliberate underperformance maddening. They understand each other completely, which is what makes the occasional moments of real alliance so striking. When they need each other, they are there. The irritation is real and the loyalty is real, and both things exist at once, which is the truest thing the show ever said about siblings. Lisa the vegetarian is an early example of the show engaging Lisa's ethics directly and without entirely satirizing them. She becomes a vegetarian after bonding with a lamb at a petting zoo. The family is unsympathetic. The show gives adequate time to the family's position without endorsing it. Paul and Linda McCartney appear in the episode specifically to affirm Lisa's choice, and to tell her that she doesn't have to impose her choice on others to maintain it for herself. This is a genuine ethical lesson, delivered in a cartoon, and it is correct. What the show keeps returning to, in its Lisa episodes, is the question of what you do with clarity when the world around you is comfortable with fog. There is no easy answer. The show doesn't offer one. What it offers instead is Lisa herself not resolved, not triumphant, not vindicated, just continuing. Continuing to play the saxophone in the night air. Continuing to read books that are too old for her, continuing to care about things that nobody around her cares about, because the alternative, caring about nothing or pretending not to care, is a thing she cannot make herself do. Lisa's Buddhism, introduced in the later seasons, though its roots are visible much earlier in her character, is the show taking seriously something that most American comedies would treat as a joke. Her conversion is presented as genuine, as the result of a genuine search for an ethical framework that matches the seriousness of her moral sensibility. The show treats it with respect. It also, in the way of a show that is always honest about complications, shows the ways in which the conversion creates new forms of isolation. The Buddhist Lisa is even less legible to Springfield than the progressive Lisa was. That stubbornness, which costs her everything socially, is the thing the show most admires about her. The show loves Lisa most when she is most alone, because that is when she is most fully herself. And the show knows, even if Lisa doesn't yet, that being fully yourself is the only thing worth being, and that the loneliness it costs is a price worth paying, even when you are 8 years old and the saxophone is the only thing that sounds right. In all the years the show has run, in all the episodes, in all the versions of Lisa Simpson, the writers have produced the soapbox Lisa, the vulnerable Lisa, the triumphant Lisa, the quietly devastated Lisa. The constant is this: she is trying, with everything she has, to be honest, about the world, about herself, about the distance between what things are and what they could be. And she is paying a real cost for that honesty, every single episode, and she keeps paying it anyway. That is the show's deepest admiration expressed in a single character. She keeps paying it anyway. Section 6. The Deaths They Don't Show You. The Simpsons is a show in which nobody, officially, ever dies. This is the convention of the format. The cartoon sitcom exists outside of ordinary time, outside of aging and consequence, in a perpetual present where last week's trauma is this week's footnote. The characters don't age. The children remain children. The old people remain approximately as old as they've always been. But loss is threaded through the show in ways that the official narrative doesn't account for. People leave. People disappear. Things end. And the show at its best doesn't pretend otherwise. Maud Flanders is the clearest case. She died in season 11, in Alone Again, Natura Diddley, in circumstances that the show handled imperfectly, but the loss of which it handled with more seriousness than most would have expected. Ned Flanders loses his wife to a random accident. She is hit by a t-shirt cannon at a racing event, which is absurd, but the absurdity is the point. Death in actual life is often absurd. It doesn't arrive in moments calibrated for emotional weight. It comes at a NASCAR race, from a piece of promotional merchandise, while your husband is watching cars go in circles. The show understood this. What the show understood even better is what Ned lost in losing Maud. She was his partner in a genuine sense. She shared his faith. She matched his devotion to that faith. She was the person who made the life they were building together make sense. Without her, Ned is a man whose entire framework for meaning is intact, but whose reason for applying it daily has been removed. His grief in the episodes following her death is handled with the kind of quiet seriousness that the show reserved for its most honest moments. The show never let him fully recover, and this is the right choice. He finds a degree of peace. He dates again badly, mostly, with that specific awkwardness of someone trying to perform normalcy while the absence underneath is still enormous. But Maud's absence is a permanent condition of Ned's character from that point forward, and the show acknowledges this without making it the center of every episode. It lives in the background, the way loss actually lives. Mona Simpson, Homer's mother, dies in a later season episode. The episode is not the equal of Mother Simpson, the earlier episode in which she reappeared, but the death itself is handled with genuine care. Homer finds her gone one morning, peacefully, and the episode allows him his grief without rushing past it. There is a scene where Homer sits with her body and talks to her, tells her the things he didn't get to say, that is as honest as anything in the later seasons. A man talking to his dead mother, telling her that he forgives her for leaving, and that he thinks she was brave, and that he is glad she was his. The words don't fix anything. They never do. They're just said into the silence, and the silence holds them. The recurring losses the show explores are not always deaths. Sometimes they are departures, endings of relationships, the slow fading of people from a life. And sometimes they are the loss of possibilities, the roads not taken that the show keeps returning to in its flashback and flash-forward episodes. Lisa's Wedding, a season 6 episode and one of the greatest single episodes of the series, is a glimpse of the future, presented as a carnival fortune teller's vision. Lisa is in her early 20s, engaged to a British man who is clearly wrong for her in ways she can't yet see. The episode is moving for reasons that are hard to fully account for, but are somewhere in the territory of watching a character you love make a mistake you can see coming and being unable to warn her. The wedding is called off, and Lisa comes home, and in the final scene she calls her father from the payphone in the hallway. the scene is almost unbearably tender. Homer, in the future vision, is exactly as he is in the present, no wiser, no more successful, still working at the plant, still making the same noises, but in this future context, he is clearly approaching the end of his life, and his unconditional love for his daughter has a quality of finality to it that is devastating. He doesn't know what happened with the wedding. He just knows she called, and he answers, and he is happy to hear from her. That's enough. It is always enough with Homer. The episode ends with Lisa, back in the present at the carnival, walking back to her family. She turns and watches them for a moment before they notice her just looks at them. Her strange, imperfect family, standing there in the noise of the carnival, and then she walks toward them. It is a small thing. It is everything. That walking back, that choosing again, that willingness to return to the difficult love of the family that shaped you, the show understands that this is the whole of a life in a single gesture. The show's most sustained engagement with loss is, arguably, its treatment of the passage of time in episodes that step outside the official no-aging continuity. The flashbacks to Homer and Marge's courtship, the flash-forward to Lisa's wedding, the family at various future points. These are episodes in which the show allows its characters to age, and to be aged, and to carry the weight of years in the way that actual people carry it. In all of these episodes, there is a quality of tenderness toward the past that feels autobiographical, as if the writers, many of whom had been with the show for years, were processing their own relationship to time and change through these characters. The Springfield of the early seasons existed in a specific historical moment, the America of the late 1980s and early 1990s, and as that moment receded into the past, the show began to be nostalgic for itself, and the nostalgia was real. The Way We Was, the flashback to Homer and Marge's high school years, is suffused with this quality. It is not just a romantic backstory. It is a hymn to the specific texture of a particular period, the music, the social rituals, the particular quality of possibility that was available in that moment, and to the people who were young in that period and are young no longer. Homer and Marge are adults now. The teenagers they were are lost. The episode grieves them, quietly, while celebrating what they became. This is what death means in The Simpsons, finally. Not primarily the literal deaths that occur across the series, though those are real and are handled with care. What death means is loss in its broadest sense. The loss of the person you were, the loss of the time that's passed, the loss of the possibilities that closed when other possibilities opened, the loss of people who leave, or are taken, or simply drift away into different stories. Springfield is a place where the official story says nothing is lost, nothing changes, nobody ages. The real story, told in the margins, in the episodes that step outside the convention, is that everything is always being lost, and the people of Springfield carry those losses the way actual people carry them silently, imperfectly, with occasional outbursts of grief that don't resolve anything but make the carrying slightly more bearable. The show honors this. It puts the grief in the flashbacks and the dream sequences, and the what-if episodes, and the moments between jokes where a face holds an expression too long, and you understand that the person behind the joke is feeling something the joke is covering. It is a show that understands loss. It just hides that understanding behind yellow skin and sight gags and the laugh track, so you don't notice how much it knows until it's already gotten you. Section 7. Every marriage in Springfield. The marriages of Springfield form a map of American domestic life, and it is not a flattering map. There is Homer and Marge, the central case. There is Ned and Maude, and then Ned alone. There is Apu and Manjula. There is Chief Wiggum and Sarah. There is the Van Houten marriage, which spends years on the verge of collapse. There is Patty and Selma's collective rejection of the institution, a different kind of verdict. There are the marriages glimpsed in the background, the Lovejoys and the Hibbert family, and the various Springfield couples who appear in crowd scenes, each carrying their own freight of negotiation and compromise and private cost. The show, unusually for a family sitcom, treats marriage not as a fixed backdrop, but as an ongoing project, something that has to be maintained, that can fail, that involves real work and real difficulty and real decisions about whether to continue. This is not the premise of most family television. Most family television treats the marriage as a given, a stable structure from which comedy can safely be generated. The Simpsons treats it as one of the central dramas of adult life. Homer and Marge's marriage is the show's primary case study in what it costs to stay. They have been on the edge of divorce multiple times across the series. They have had periods of genuine estrangement. They have both, at various points, been tempted by other possibilities. Homer by Mindy Simmons, the coworker played by Michelle Pfeiffer in a season 5 episode that is more honest about the mechanics of workplace attraction than most dramas manage. Marge by Jacques, the bowling instructor who appears in the first season and who represents, with his European suaveness and his willingness to see Marge as an individual rather than a role, exactly what the domestic arrangement hasn't given her. In both cases, the show explores the temptation seriously. It doesn't simply have the character pull back immediately because they're married, and that's the rule. It lets them get close. It lets them feel what the alternative might offer, and then it has them choose their marriage, which would be merely conventional if the show hadn't spent the preceding 20 minutes making the alternative genuinely appealing. The choice to stay, in The Simpsons, is always presented as a real choice rather than an obligation. This is crucial. If staying were presented as simply what you do, what's expected, what's required, then the staying would carry no moral weight. It would just be compliance. The fact that the show consistently presents real alternatives and then has the characters choose against them is what makes the marriage meaningful. They keep choosing each other. That means something. But the show doesn't pretend that the choosing makes everything easy or that the choosing resolves the underlying tensions. Marge is still doing the invisible labor after she chooses. Homer is still, structurally, a man who needs more from his marriage than he gives to it. These things remain true. What changes is not the conditions, but the decision about how to be within those conditions. And that decision is what the show calls love. Ned and Maud's marriage is the countermodel, the marriage that was, by every external measure, the one that worked. They shared their faith. They were patient with each other. They were present to each other in ways that Homer and Marge sometimes weren't. And then Maud died, and the model was suddenly useless, because the external signs of a good marriage don't protect you from the randomness of loss. What the show does with Ned after Maud is something quietly radical. It allows him to be a man who is genuinely completed by his marriage in a way that made him less functional on his own. He is not damaged exactly. He continues. He is a good father, a good neighbor, a devoted man of faith. But there is a quality of being for someone that Ned had with Maud that he cannot fully replicate with anyone else, and the show does not pretend otherwise. Some people are made more themselves by a particular relationship, and when that relationship ends, they are diminished not in their character but in their capacity. Ned is less after Maud in that way. The show honors this by neither forcing his recovery nor wallowing in his grief. He lives with it. That is what you do. The Van Houten marriage is the show's study in what happens when a marriage that should end doesn't end, because the people in it are too frightened or too familiar to actually leave. Kirk and Luann Van Houten are miserable together in ways that have nothing to do with dramatic incompatibility. They are simply two people who have grown apart and found that the distance is uncomfortable, but the alternative is more frightening. They divorce eventually, and neither of them handles it particularly well. Kirk's post-divorce storyline is played mostly for comedy. He moves into a terrible apartment. He tries to re-enter the dating world with the complete lack of social skill that long-term marriage produces in people who don't maintain outside friendships. He is pathetic in ways that are recognizable and a little uncomfortable to watch. But underneath the comedy, there is something accurate about what the end of a long-term marriage actually looks like. It is not freedom. It is exposure. The rituals and accommodations and habits of a shared life are structures, and when they're gone, you realize how much of what you thought was yourself was actually just the structure. Apu and Manjula's arranged marriage is handled with care, and the episode takes seriously the question of how two people build intimacy from an institutional arrangement. They fall in love, the show tells us, and the falling is gradual and particular, the result of specific moments of genuine contact rather than a sudden romantic revelation. This is a more realistic portrait of how love develops in long-term relationships than the lightning strike version that most storytelling relies on. Love that arrives slowly, built from proximity and attention and the small negotiations of a shared life, is the more common kind. It is also, the show suggests, the more durable kind. The Lovejoy marriage is interesting because it is the show's picture of what happens when the institutional framework of a relationship becomes the relationship when the roles are so fully inhabited that the people inside them have largely disappeared. Timothy Lovejoy is the town's minister, and his marriage to Helen is a performance of Christian domestic rectitude that seems to have consumed whatever was genuinely between them. Helen's gossip, her constant vigilance for other people's sins, reads as the activity of a woman who has outsourced her inner life to other people's dramas because her own inner life has been foreclosed. What The Simpsons ultimately says about marriage, through all of this, is that it is a practice more than a state, not a destination you arrive at and then maintain, but something you have to do every day. You have to keep choosing. You have to keep finding, in the ordinary days of a shared life, the reason the choice was right. Some people do this and some people don't. And the difference is not always visible from the outside, and the success of a marriage is not always a reliable indicator of the health of the people inside it. It is one of the more honest portrayals of domestic life that American popular culture has produced, and it arrived in a cartoon on a Sunday night dressed as a comedy about a yellow family with four-fingered hands. That is the kind of trick The Simpsons has always been pulling, right in front of you in plain sight. Section 8. The show's relationship with God. There is an episode of The Simpsons in which Homer Simpson, having decided not to go to church one Sunday, sits in his backyard and watches a hummingbird land on his finger and feels, unmistakably, the presence of something he cannot name. He does not become religious in this episode. He does not have a conversion experience. He continues, for the rest of the episode and the rest of the series, to be Homer skeptical, distracted, fundamentally oriented toward the immediate and the sensory. But that moment in the backyard is real, and the show treats it as real. And this is part of what makes The Simpsons' engagement with faith in God more interesting than most televisions. Homer the Heretic, from Season 4, is the episode in question, and it is one of the finest half hours of television ever produced. Homer's decision to skip church is initially presented as laziness. He wants to sleep in, eat what he wants, watch football without anyone judging him. But as the episode develops, something more interesting emerges. Homer's relationship to the sacred is direct and personal in ways that organized religion, as represented by Reverend Lovejoy's genuinely dull services at Springfield Presbyterian, cannot accommodate. He feels God in the yard. He has a dream in which God appears and they have a real conversation. He is not an atheist. He is a man whose religious sensibility is too immediate and too personal to fit inside the box of institutional practice. The episode ends with a fire-destroying part of the house, with Ned Flanders and Krusty the Clown and Apu all contributing to saving Homer's life through very different kinds of response: the Christian neighbor, the Jewish comedian, the Hindu shopkeeper. God appears in Homer's dream again and tells him that he agrees with Homer's criticism of organized religion, but points out that the community it builds is the point, not the doctrine. Homer returns to church. The episode closes without fully resolving the theological questions it opened, which is the correct choice. Ned Flanders is the show's most sustained engagement with faith as a character condition, and what the show does with Ned is complicated and largely admirable. He is not a hypocrite. The show explicitly refuses that easy characterization. Ned's faith is genuine. His practice is sincere. His commitment to the principles he professes is, by the standards of the show, actually real. He doesn't just go to church. He tries to live as he believes he should live. He is patient when patience is very difficult. He is generous when generosity costs him something. He maintains his temper through provocations that would break most people. The crack in this, when it comes, is not hypocrisy. It is a moment in Season 8 when Ned's house is destroyed by a hurricane and the community rebuilds it badly, and Ned, who has spent his entire life trusting that God's purposes are good and that faith will sustain him through difficulty, has a breakdown. He has a genuine crisis of faith, not as a dramatic device, but as a real human experience, the moment when everything you believed is tested by everything you've lost. He screams at the congregation. He screams at God. He says the things he has been carefully not saying for years: the unfairnesses, the unanswered prayers, the cost of sustained goodness in a world that doesn't reliably reward it. And then he is admitted to a psychiatric facility, which is played for comedy, but is also the show's honest acknowledgement that sustained faith under sustained pressure can break a person's mind in ways that need professional help. Ned recovers. He returns to his faith. But something in the character changes after that episode. His faith becomes, very slightly, less certain, more tested, more like the faith of someone who has genuinely argued with God, rather than the faith of someone who has never had reason to. This is the show's most sophisticated theological observation, that faith which has been tested and survived is worth more than faith that has never been challenged. Ned's post-hurricane belief is humbler and more real than the faith that preceded it. The cost was enormous. What emerged from the cost was something with more weight. Lisa's spiritual journey runs parallel to Ned's in interesting ways. She becomes a Buddhist, and her Buddhism is not the soft focus version that American popular culture tends to produce when it engages with Eastern religion. It is a genuine engagement with suffering, with impermanence, with the question of how to act ethically in a world that resists ethical action. Lisa the Buddhist is a person who has looked at the evidence of existence and concluded that the best response is attention, compassion, and a willingness to sit with difficulty rather than reach for easy consolations. Her Buddhism puts her in interesting tension with the rest of her family, who are nominally Christian without being particularly engaged by the practice. But the tension is not, at its heart, about doctrine. It is about the question of whether the universe is organized around something that could be called goodness, or whether goodness is simply what humans bring to a universe that does not care. Lisa believes the former. The show doesn't commit, it maintains the productive uncertainty that is perhaps its most sophisticated theological position. Homer's relationship with God is the most direct in the family, and it is also the most American. He relates to God as he relates to other powerful figures in his life, with a combination of genuine feeling and performative complaint, with requests and negotiations and occasional gratitude, and the fundamental assumption that God, like any power operating above him, is essentially inscrutable, but can sometimes be reasoned with. He prays when he needs something. He complains when the answer is no. He is not particularly consistent in his practice, but he is persistent in his belief that the practice is worth maintaining. This is theologically unserious by any formal standard, but it is very accurately American, and the show knows it. American folk religion is largely transactional. It involves a personal relationship with God that is conducted on terms the individual finds acceptable, without much reference to doctrine or institutional authority. Homer's religion is this to its core, and the show treats it with affectionate accuracy rather than satire. The show's deepest theological position might be embedded in the simple, recurring fact that the universe of the show is one in which grace operates. Characters are given second chances. Love persists past the point where it should logically have burned out. People who have done genuinely bad things are occasionally, improbably, forgiven. Not always. Not reliably, but enough that the world of the show is not a purely secular one, not a world governed entirely by consequence and logic and the absence of mercy. Springfield is a fallen world in the theological sense. It is full of people who have failed each other and themselves, who have made choices they know to be wrong, who have chosen comfort over honesty and convenience over courage. But it is also a world in which Sunday morning still comes, and the church is still there, and Ned Flanders is still on the other side of the fence, being patient. That is, I think, a theological position. It says, we don't resolve the question of whether the universe is good, but we act as if it might be, because the acting is the thing that makes it so. Ned's patience is a wager. Homer's impulsive prayers are a wager. Lisa's ethical commitments are a wager. They are all, in different registers, betting that the caring matters. The show never confirms that bet, but it also never closes the table. Section 9. Springfield as a portrait of class in America. Springfield has a nuclear power plant. This is, if you think about it, a very specific choice. The show could have put Homer Simpson in any number of jobs: factory worker, bus driver, mechanic. It chose a nuclear power plant for reasons that are worth taking seriously. Nuclear power is simultaneously the promise and the threat of the post-war American industrial project. The same technology that kept the lights on in Springfield also made weapons that could erase Springfield and everything around it, and everything around that. The plant where Homer works is a monument to American technological ambition and a symbol of the specific way that ambition, organized around profit and operated by people like Mr. Burns, becomes routinely, casually lethal. Homer is a safety inspector. He does not do his job particularly well. He sleeps at the console. He ignores warning lights. He is distracted by donuts and football at moments when his attention to the readings before him could literally mean the difference between life and death for everyone in the town. This is played as comedy. It is also the show's most concentrated statement about the American working class's relationship to the institutions it powers. The people doing the most important work are the people with the least power, the least recognition, the least investment in the outcomes, because the system has given them no rational reason to invest. Mr. Burns is one of the great villains of American popular culture, and he is great for reasons that go beyond his effective comic monstrousness. He is the show's portrait of capital, of the specific kind of person that a society organized entirely around the accumulation of wealth eventually produces. He is very old, which is the show's visual metaphor for the age of the capitalist class. He comes from a different era, operates by a different set of assumptions, and has survived long enough that the system that created him has been modified multiple times, but he has simply continued. He does not understand why other people would have feelings that take precedence over his interests, because the system he inhabits has never required him to develop that understanding. His relationship with Smithers is one of the show's most complicated, ongoing dynamics. Wayland Smithers serves Burns with a devotion that has the structure and the texture of love, which, in Smithers, it is. He is gay, which the show addressed gradually and then explicitly over the years. His love for Burns is unrequited, or rather it is requited in the limited way that Burns is capable of requiting anything. Burns values Smithers as a function, not as a person, and Smithers knows this and has made a comprehensive accommodation to it. The tragedy of Smithers is the tragedy of the person who has organized their entire emotional life around someone who cannot reciprocate. He is competent, educated, resourceful, genuinely kind underneath the professional severity. He could have a full life. He has chosen instead to make Burns the center of his existence, and the show neither endorses this choice nor fully condemns it. It simply observes it, with the specific sadness it reserves for lives that have been structured around the wrong center. The class geography of Springfield is carefully constructed and consistently maintained. The rich parts of town, the hills, the areas near the golf course are inhabited by characters the show presents with a very different register than the working-class streets where the Simpsons live. The satire of the wealthy in Springfield is broader, less sympathetic, less interested in the inner lives of its subjects. This is a deliberate choice. The show is made by and for and about people who live in the parts of Springfield that look like the Simpsons neighborhood, and its capacity for empathy is explicitly organized around that position. Barney Gumble is one of the show's most sustained meditations on class and failure. He was, in his youth, an intelligent and promising person who went to Harvard. We learn this in various flashback episodes, and it always lands with a jolt. The man who sits at the end of the bar at Moe's, who has no apparent prospects, attended one of the world's most prestigious universities. The show gives us pieces of his decline but maintains the fundamental mystery, because the show understands that the mechanism of Barney's fall is less important than the fact of it. What Barney's character says about class is this: the fall is real and it can happen to anyone. The social safety nets that are supposed to prevent people from becoming Barney do not work, or they work for some people and not for others, along lines that the show is honest about even if it doesn't always state them explicitly. Barney is in Moe's because the other places he might have been, the office, the professional class, the life that Harvard was supposed to open, did not hold him. Why didn't they hold him? The show doesn't say. The uncertainty is the point. Moe's Tavern is the working-class institution the show spends the most time inside, and it is a more honest portrait of what the American bar means to working-class life than almost anything else in popular culture. It is not a fun place. It is a necessary place. It is the place where the people who don't have anywhere better to go, and it serves a function that the official social infrastructure doesn't. It provides company, a kind of community, the daily presence of other people who are also somewhere between where they wanted to be and where they've ended up. Moe himself is the custodian of this space, and his relationship to it tells you everything about what the tavern means. He didn't choose to run a bar. He ended up running a bar, and the running of it has become his entire life, and he knows that this is not how it was supposed to go. And he goes on running it because what else do you do? That resignation, carried without self-pity, is the bar's atmosphere. It is why people keep coming back. The economic anxiety that hums underneath the series is constant, even in episodes where it is not the explicit subject. Homer worries about money. They can't afford things. The house is in a state of partial disrepair that reflects the ongoing negotiation between what needs to be fixed and what they can afford to fix right now. Christmas specials in the show are often specifically about the fear of not being able to give your children enough, which is a very working-class fear, very different from the wealthy anxieties that dominate much of American entertainment. Burns's relationship to the town is the show's clearest statement on the political economy of company towns. He employs enough of Springfield that his interests and the town's interests have become entangled in ways that are systematically corrupting. He funds politicians. He controls the local newspaper when he feels the need to. He can threaten to close the plant and hold the entire town's economic welfare hostage to his personal preferences. This is presented as specific to Burns but is identified, clearly, as a structural condition. The problem is not simply the bad old man on the hill. The problem is the system that made the bad old man on the hill possible and makes him powerful and makes the town unable to respond to his power with anything other than accommodation. Springfield in this reading is America. Not a satire of America, not an exaggerated version of America, but America, the real place, with its real economic structures and its real class dynamics, and its real way of making the powerful, powerful, and the powerless accommodate that power. The yellow cartoon family in the middle of it all is not a distortion. They are the accurate center, and the show knows this. The show has always known this. The reason The Simpsons landed so hard when it arrived, the reason it felt so different from everything else on television, is that it was actually looking at the America that existed, the one with the company town and the underfunded school, and the bar where the unemployed and the nearly unemployed sat together at the end of the day, and drawing it without the customary softening. Other shows set in similar worlds made the poverty look cozy. The Simpsons made it look real, and then told jokes inside it, and somehow the combination produced something that felt more like love than any of the softer shows ever did, because you can only really love something you see clearly. The Simpsons saw Springfield clearly, and it loved it anyway. That's the whole show, in a sentence. Section 10. The side characters who carry the whole show. The Simpsons has the greatest supporting cast in the history of American television, and this is not a casual claim. What the show did, across its first 8 seasons especially, was build a world. Not just a family, not just a neighborhood, but a fully realized community with its own internal logic, its own recurring types and rhythms, its own sense of how things work and how people fail and how they occasionally, surprisingly, manage to be decent to each other. The side characters of Springfield are not background, they are the show's deepest investment. Mo Sislak first. Mo is, in the mythology of the show, a former boxing prodigy who was robbed of his one great opportunity and ended up tending bar in a dying establishment in a town that he has no particular reason to love. He is ugly in a way the show uses both for comedy and for something more serious. His ugliness is constantly referenced, and the references accumulate into a portrait of a man who has been told, consistently, that he is less than, and who has incorporated this into his fundamental understanding of himself. He is deeply lonely. This is not background texture. This is the fact that organizes Mo's character across his appearances. He has no romantic relationship that lasts. He has friends, Homer and the gang, but the nature of those friendships is asymmetrical in ways that Mo feels but doesn't always articulate. He is the place they go. He is not the person any of them would necessarily go to first with something that actually mattered. The episodes centered on Mo's loneliness are some of the most quietly devastating in the series. He is a romantic, in the deep sense he believes in love, wants it, has never found a version of it that holds. He cries, sometimes, when he thinks nobody is watching. The show shows us him crying. That specificity, the show bothering to show us Mo's private grief, is what elevates the character from comic type to something more. He is not just the bartender. He is a man who is the bartender because he ran out of other options, and who has made the bar his entire world, because the bar is the one thing that keeps the loneliness from being completely total. Mo has a tenderness that he keeps buried under the gruffness. It surfaces in unexpected ways, in a gentleness toward a child, in an impulsive generosity that he immediately regrets and covers with complaint, in the care he takes of Homer even while claiming not to care about Homer. The show is precise about this. The people who are most defended against feeling are often the ones who feel most acutely, and the defenses are proportional to the vulnerability they're protecting. Moe's entire personality is a defense around something real. The show never lets you forget that the real thing is there. Chief Wiggum is the show's portrait of institutional failure in law enforcement, and it is a more honest portrait than it often gets credit for being. He is not malicious, exactly. He is lazy and self-interested and easily bought and uninterested in doing his job properly. He is the specific kind of bad cop that is much more common than the dramatic bad cop of other television, not cruel, not violent by nature, just comprehensively indifferent to the welfare of the public he is supposed to serve. The corruption is so ordinary it has become invisible, even to him. His son Ralph is one of the show's most interesting recurring figures. Ralph Wiggum's famous non sequiturs and apparent disconnection from consensus reality have generated countless memes. But within the logic of the show, Ralph is something more interesting than a comedy prop. He is a child who experiences the world differently, whose interior is rich and strange, and whose exterior expressions of it are regularly misread by everyone around him. He is also, in his quiet way, the kindest person in Springfield. He is without malice. He is without the social calculation that governs most interpersonal transactions. When Ralph says something to Lisa that is apparently absurd, the absurdity often contains an accidental accuracy that the show is clearly aware of. Ralph sees things sideways, and some things can only be seen sideways. Principal Skinner is the show's portrait of the man trapped by institutional identity. He has organized his entire self around the role of principal. It is not merely his job. It is who he is, or rather who he has agreed to be. Because the person he actually was, the young man who went to Vietnam, who had ambitions, who wanted things, is buried under the layers of administrative authority and parental control, and the specific resignation that comes from spending decades in a school designed to crush the spirit. His relationship with his mother Agnes is the show's most unflinching portrait of a certain kind of maternal dominance. Agnes Skinner is not a villain. She is a woman who needed to remain central to her son's life and found ways to make that need his problem. Skinner accepted this arrangement because the alternative, claiming his own life, taking up the space of a fully formed self, requires a kind of courage he has never quite managed to summon. There are moments when you see him almost get there, almost stand up for something, almost choose himself, and then Agnes says something, or appears in the doorway, or simply exists at the exact wrong moment, and the moment passes. It always passes. Lenny Leonard and Carl Carlson are Homer's closest friends at the plant, and they are a study in how the show handles its working-class ensemble. Their friendship with each other has a quality that the show handles with surprising delicacy. There is a depth of feeling between Lenny and Carl that runs deeper than most marriages on the show. Lenny's interior life, when the show turns its attention to it, is full of yearning. He wants more than he has. He doesn't quite know what more would look like, but he senses its absence. Carl, more settled, more apparently comfortable with his circumstances, is the mirror against which Lenny measures his own restlessness, and the friendship holds because each of them gives the other something that neither of them could find elsewhere. Krusty the Clown is the show's deepest meditation on performance and authentic identity. He is a celebrity, a brand, a children's entertainer whose private life is characterized by exhaustion, disappointment, and a gambling addiction that runs through his finances the way alcoholism runs through Barney's. He is Jewish in a town that is barely noticed, performing a character called Krusty, whose relationship to the man underneath is entirely commercial. He is Herschel Christofsky, the son of a rabbi who disapproved of his choice of career and whose disapproval has shaped Krusty's self-understanding at a cellular level. His relationship with Bart is one of the show's quiet central bonds. Bart adores Krusty in the way children adore people who give them permission, whose existence says, you can be chaotic, you can reject the respectable path, you can be loud and inappropriate and still be loved, still be watched, still matter. That Krusty is actually a deeply unhappy man, doing none of these things from a position of genuine freedom, is something Bart senses but does not want to fully know. There is an episode Krusty gets canceled in which Bart's investment in Krusty's success is revealed to be an investment in the permission that Krusty represents. Save Krusty, save the idea that you can be that way and be okay. Bart needs that idea. The show understands why. What the supporting cast of Springfield achieves, collectively, is something like a portrait of a society, not the abstracted, statisticized portrait of sociology, but the specific, embodied portrait of individual lives organized around and against each other. Every side character is a node in a network of relationships and disappointments and accommodations that mirrors, with astonishing fidelity, the actual texture of American civic life. The show never stops adding to this portrait. It fills in the background continuously, adding details that nobody specifically asked for and that accumulate into something overwhelming, a complete world, fully inhabited, fully felt. This is the thing that keeps people coming back to Springfield even after the quality of individual episodes has declined. The world is still there. The characters are still there. The specific texture of a specific community, its rhythms, its gossip, its recurring institutional failures, its intermittent grace is still there, accumulated across decades, available to anyone who settles in. Section 11. What the Golden Age was actually about. The Simpsons had a golden age. This is a matter of broad consensus among people who care about television, about comedy, about the show itself. Seasons 3 through 8, roughly 1991 to 1997, represent a sustained peak of creative achievement that is, by most serious assessments, simply unparalleled in American television comedy. But the way people talk about the Golden Age usually focuses on the comedy, the jokes per minute, the density of cultural references, the willingness to be weird, to subvert, to take genre conventions apart and put them back together in unexpected configurations. Cape Fear, Homer's Barbershop Quartet, Marge versus the Monorail, the episode where Homer goes to space, the one where they parody different film genres, the one where Bart sells his soul, the relentless, exhilarating speed of thought. What I want to suggest is that the comedy is not the point of the Golden Age. The comedy is the delivery mechanism. The point, the thing the Golden Age is actually about, the reason it resonates the way it does, the reason people who grew up with those seasons carry them as formative experiences, is emotional. The Golden Age is the period in which the show achieved its most complete integration of comedy and feeling. The period in which the jokes were funniest because the emotional stakes underneath them were highest. The period in which the laughter and the tenderness were genuinely inseparable rather than existing in separate registers. Take Homer's Triple Bypass from Season 4. It is a very funny episode. The jokes are excellent. The parody of medical television is sharp. The B-plot involving Bart learning heart surgery from a video game contains several of the show's best visual gags, but the episode is not great because of those things. It is great because of Homer on the edge of Bart's bed in the dark, saying quietly that he loves him. It is great because of Homer in the hospital corridor, genuinely frightened about whether he will survive, choosing to express this fear through a moment of real connection with his son rather than a punchline. Homer's Enemy Season 8 is a later Golden Age episode that divides fans because it is the show's most explicit engagement with what Homer Simpson looks like from the outside. Frank Grimes is a man who has worked hard his entire life and achieved little. He arrives at the plant to find Homer Simpson lazy, irresponsible, wildly fortunate in ways he has done nothing to earn, celebrated, and beloved. Grimes's response is the response of a man whose entire framework for how the world works is proved incorrect by Homer's existence. He has a breakdown. He dies. The episode is played as comedy and is genuinely funny, but it is also the show's clearest direct engagement with a question it has always been circling. What does it mean that Homer is beloved? That the man who falls asleep at the nuclear console, who causes disaster after disaster, who is the failure by every conventional metric, is surrounded by love and warmth and continues to be okay? Is that a comic fantasy? A consolation prize? Or is it a genuine claim about what matters? That love and family and community survive the failures that are supposed to disqualify you? Grimes would say it's an injustice. The show doesn't agree, exactly, but it takes Grimes' position seriously. It lets him be right about the facts while being wrong about what the facts mean. And there is something genuinely unsettling in the episode's refusal to comfort you either way. Homer watches Grimes die and doesn't quite understand why, which is both funny and terrible. Springfield shows up at the funeral and doesn't quite understand why, which is both funny and terrible. The world of the show continues, unchanged, and that continuation is both funny and terrible. The episode is in 3 registers at once, and the fact that all 3 work simultaneously is what Golden Age writing could do that no other era of the show could match. Bart Sells His Soul Season 7 is the episode that most explicitly engages the theological and philosophical questions the show had been approaching for years. Bart, who has no clear belief in souls, sells his to Milhouse for $5 to demonstrate that the soul is not real and nothing will change. Things change. Not dramatically, not obviously, but Bart begins to feel a disconnection from the world around him that he cannot account for mechanistically. He can't feel things the way he used to. The universe seems slightly further away. The episode never resolves whether the soul is literally real in the show's universe or whether Bart is simply experiencing the psychological consequences of having treated something potentially sacred as disposable. The ending is warm and simple and arrives after 20 minutes of genuine metaphysical uncertainty. That's the Golden Age. It earns the warm ending by actually making you feel the cost. Rosebud Season 5 uses the Citizen Kane framework to give Mr. Burns one of his finest moments. At the center of Burns' fearsome power is a stuffed bear called Bobo, left behind in his childhood, the specific object of a specific loss that has never been replaced or compensated for by any subsequent accumulation. He wants Bobo back, he has everything else. The show is making a point about the things that can't be purchased. The early losses that persist regardless of what you do afterward, the specific object attached to the specific memory that no amount of power can recover. It is also the episode that comes closest to making Burns sympathetic, which is a remarkable achievement. You don't stop seeing him as a monster. But you see the child inside the monster, and the specific loss that the monster grew around, and the image is exactly as sad as the show means it to be. The monster was made. Something made it. The making was a loss. That's the whole structure of Burns as a character, compressed into one stuffed bear. The Golden Age writers shared a sensibility that can be described imprecisely as care about the characters first, find the jokes in the truth of the characters, and don't let the jokes cover the truth. This sounds simple. It is not simple. It requires constant discipline to maintain, because the jokes are easier, and the jokes get rewarded immediately laughs in the room, laughs from the network executives, while the emotional truth of a scene is harder to evaluate and easier to cut when time runs short. The Golden Age maintained this discipline because the people in the writer's room believed in it, and because the show had developed enough of a history by that point that the characters had become genuinely complex. There was something real at stake in these people's lives. Something that had accumulated across years of episodes, and the writers understood that spending it cheaply on a joke would waste something that had taken years to build. And Maggie Makes 3 Season 6 is perhaps the purest example of Golden Age emotional ambition. It is constructed as an answer to a question Bart and Lisa ask at a family dinner. Why are there no photos of Maggie in the family photo albums? Homer's flashback to the circumstances of Maggie's birth, the moment he achieved his dream of leaving the plant, the moment that dream was closed back down by the unexpected pregnancy, the moment he returned to work under Burns's mocking sign, is one of the most carefully constructed emotional payoffs in the series. The answer to the photo question is revealed in the final moments. Homer took all the photos of Maggie and put them at work, covering the letters of Burns' sign to make it read, "Do it for her." It is a perfect ending. Simple, specific, not a statement about anything universal, but about this particular man and his particular choice to find meaning in a life that tried to deny him the conventional forms of meaning. That is what the Golden Age was about, not the jokes, the particular lives, the particular choices, the particular way that human beings, given no good options, find a way to mean something to someone. And the particular grace of showing that honestly, repeatedly, without sentimentality, in a cartoon so that the people watching it know that their particular lives, their particular choices, their particular difficult loves are also worth something. Section 12. Why it never ended, and what that means. The Simpsons is still on the air. As of this writing, it has aired more than 35 seasons and shows no particular signs of stopping. This makes it, by a significant margin, the longest-running American primetime scripted television series ever, and it is possible, perhaps likely, that no other program will reach this mark in the era of streaming fragmentation and shortened attention spans. The obvious answer to why it never ended is money. The Simpsons has been one of Fox's most valuable properties for decades. The merchandising alone generates revenues that most shows can't approach. The reruns run continuously. The streaming deals are worth fortunes. Ending the show is, financially, a choice to leave a great deal of money on the table. But this answer, while accurate, does not fully account for the cultural phenomenon. Shows get canceled despite profitability. The Simpsons has survived conversations about ending it, proposals to end it, periods of critical and popular indifference, without ever actually ending. Something more than inertia is at work. I want to suggest that The Simpsons continues because the audience won't let it end, and that the reason the audience won't let it end is that the show represents something that the audience is not prepared to lose. What does it represent? It depends on who you ask, because the show has meant different things to different people across different periods of their lives. For people who grew up with the Golden Age seasons, it is something like the texture of childhood, not the actual events of childhood, but the specific quality of attention that childhood allows. The total absorption in a world that feels complete. The Simpsons was that world for a generation. It was the place where everything meant something, where the jokes were smart enough to reward your full attention, and the emotions were honest enough to reach you, even when you were young enough not to know what they were reaching for. That world doesn't exist anymore in the way it did. The Golden Age is over. The show that currently airs is a different show, technically still The Simpsons. Still the same characters, still the same setting, but operating with different priorities and a different relationship to the emotional truth that the Golden Age maintained. People who grew up with the Golden Age know this. They keep caring about it anyway, because ending it would mean officially admitting that the world of those years is gone. This is what nostalgia is, at its deepest level. Not a preference for the past over the present, but a resistance to the finality of loss. As long as The Simpsons continues even in diminished form, even as a shadow of what it was, the Springfield of the Golden Age has a kind of official existence. It is still there, in some sense. The day the show ends, it becomes purely historical. The present tense becomes past tense, permanently. The show understands this about itself, at least partially, and has engaged with it directly in some of its most thoughtful later episodes. The floating timeline, the mechanism by which the characters never age, by which the present is always now, is not simply a production convenience. It is the show's structural argument that some things should be allowed to stay. That the American family, endlessly struggling and endlessly loving and endlessly failing upward, should be allowed to remain in the present tense indefinitely, because the alternative, giving them a history, letting time accumulate, watching them age and diminish and eventually end, is something the show was never willing to do to its audience. Lisa's wedding the season 6 flash forward is the show's most direct engagement with its own future and with the question of what its characters will carry forward. Adult Lisa in her early 20s, successful, engaged, in the process of making a mistake her family couldn't have predicted and can't prevent. She is the show's version of us. She is what the children of Springfield become when they grow up. People who are more themselves in some ways and less in others, who have achieved some things and missed others, who carry the love of their strange families with them everywhere they go, because that love is the thing that stays. The final image of the episode Lisa, back in the present at the carnival, walking back toward her family, Homer's voice calling her, the specific quality of being called home by someone who loves you completely and without condition, is as close as the show ever comes to stating directly what it is about. It is about the family you were born into, with all its impossible weight and improbable warmth. It is about the town you can't quite leave, the one that shaped you in ways you're still discovering. It is about the people who were there when you were becoming who you are, and who hold that early self in their memory, even when you've moved on from it. The show's relationship to its own legacy is complicated by the fact that the legacy is so enormous. The Simpsons shaped American comedy for 2 decades. It shaped how a generation thinks about satire, about television, about the relationship between the funny and the true. It gave a generation a shared vocabulary, the catchphrases, the references, the specific way the show taught you to find the absurdity in everything while still taking the feeling seriously. That gift is not diminished by the show's later decline. The golden age remains. The episodes are still there, rewatchable, still landing the way they landed the first time, still capable of surprising you with how much feeling they contain, how precisely they were constructed, how honest they were willing to be about things that most television still refuses to approach directly. When you watch And Maggie Makes Three, now Homer looking at the photos of his daughter that he arranged to cover Burns's sign, the sign now reading "Do It For Her," you are watching something that was made in 1994 and is still, 30 years later, as true as it ever was. The details change. The feelings don't. The specific way that a parent finds meaning in the constraints that parenting imposes the sacrifice that turns out not to be a sacrifice because the thing you're sacrificing for is worth more than the thing you gave up. That is permanent. That is the kind of truth that doesn't age. The Simpsons never ended because that kind of truth doesn't need to end. It doesn't need to be resolved or concluded or wrapped up. It just needs to be stated and restated and kept alive in the culture, available to the people who need it at the moment they need it. And somewhere right now, in a different time zone, in a different country, in a life that has nothing to do with Springfield, someone is watching an episode from Season 5 or Season 3 or Season 7, and something in that episode is reaching them. Something about Homer's grief, or Marge's patience, or Bart's defended heart, or Lisa's stubborn, costly clarity is landing in the middle of their actual life and making something that was hard to understand slightly more understandable. That is why the show was never just a comedy. That is why it was always more than what it appeared to be. The show had to fight to be what it was. From the very beginning, there were forces that wanted to make it simpler, brighter, easier, less challenging. The people who made it pushed back, year after year, episode after episode, joke after joke, finding ways to say the true thing inside the funny thing, finding ways to reach you when you thought you were just watching a cartoon about a yellow family in a fictional town. They were telling you something real, about the weight people carry, about the invisible labor of love, about the children the system fails, about the loneliness of seeing clearly, about what it costs to stay, and what it means when you choose to anyway. Springfield is still there. The lights are still on at 742 Evergreen Terrace. Homer is still at the plant, Marge is still in the kitchen, Bart is still on the skateboard, and Lisa is still playing the saxophone out into the night air, the sound of it rising over a neighborhood that is ordinary and beloved and exactly what it always was. Let it play. Let the notes go where they go, into the dark, into the quiet, into whatever space is left between the end of the day and the beginning of sleep. That sound is the sound of something real. Something that was always underneath the comedy and the color and the catchphrases, trying to tell you something about the particular miracle and burden of being alive in a family, in a town, in a time, in a life. It was never just a cartoon. It was never just a comedy. It was something that cared about you, in the way that the best stories always care about the people they find. And now, here, at the end of this long walk through Springfield with the plant humming in the distance, and the stars out over the water tower and Moe's just visible through the bar window, yellow light spilling onto the sidewalk, it is enough to say simply that it was real. However yellow the family was, however impossible the physics, however many times the same plots recycled through the seasons, what they were feeling was real, what Homer was carrying was real, what Marge was managing and grieving and sustaining was real. What Bart was defending against, and what Lisa was reaching toward, all of it was real. And we were lucky to get to spend time there. End of script. Section 1 extended. The writers who made it real. There is a question worth sitting with before we go any further, and it is this: why did it work? Not why was it funny? Why did it matter in the way that it mattered, in a way that sitcoms almost never matter, in a way that left a mark on the culture that is still visible 35 years later? The answer has something to do with the people who made it. The writer's room of The Simpsons, in its golden age, was unlike any television writer's room before or since. The combination of backgrounds represented around that table multiple people who had attended elite universities, several with advanced degrees in mathematics and science, former stand-up comedians, veterans of other comedy writers' rooms, A few people who had never written for television before and didn't know what wasn't allowed produced a culture of thinking that was faster and stranger and more willing to go to uncomfortable places than the television industry's usual production of competent, conventional comedy. George Meyer is the name that comes up most often when people try to account for the specific quality of the Golden Age. He is credited by multiple colleagues with being the person most responsible for the show's philosophical backbone, the seriousness underneath the comedy, the willingness to follow a thought past the point where a lesser show would reach for a joke instead. Meyer's sensibility was formed by years of writing for National Lampoon, a publication that had always been willing to be uncomfortable in the service of something true, and he brought that willingness to Springfield. John Swartzwelder is another name, a writer so prolific and so singular in his voice that he was responsible for more Simpsons scripts than any other individual 59 episodes, by most counts, and who became something of a legend within the show's culture for the combination of density and absurdism in his work. A Swartzwelder episode is identifiable by a certain quality of joke that doesn't quite follow normal comedic logic, that takes a left turn at the moment you expect a right turn, and arrives somewhere that is both weirder and more accurate than where the more conventional path would have taken you. Conan O'Brien wrote for the show in Season 3 and Season 4 before leaving to host Late Night. The episodes he wrote, including Marge versus the Monorail, which many people consider the single greatest Simpsons episode ever made, have a quality of delirious invention that is distinctive even within the Golden Age's high standard. They move fast. They take absurdist premises completely seriously. They find the emotional truth inside the craziest possible version of the premise and hold it there until you're laughing and feeling simultaneously. This combination of people working together on a show that was still new enough to be finding its form produced a period in which anything seemed possible within the Springfield universe. The show would go from a domestic scene of heartbreaking emotional accuracy to a scene of pure absurdist comedy to a cultural reference to a satire of a cultural reference. And none of it felt disjointed because all of it was in service of the same underlying commitment, to see people clearly and to love them in the seeing. The pace of the work was extraordinary. 23 episodes per season, written, voice recorded, animated, and broadcast on a schedule that would seem impossible by today's production standards. The pressure this created was, paradoxically, productive. It forced the writers to work fast, to trust their instincts, to not overthink the moments that needed to be felt rather than constructed. Some of the most emotionally resonant scenes in the show's history were written quickly, under deadline pressure, by people who had learned to trust that if something made them feel something, it would make the audience feel something. James L. Brooks was the person who held the structural space for all of this. He is not a comedy writer in the way that Meyer or Swartzwelder are comedy writers. His background is in drama, in films about real people in real difficulty, and his sensibility is fundamentally about emotional truth rather than jokes. His presence in the room, his willingness to push back when a scene was funny but not real, was the force that kept the comedy and the feeling together rather than letting them drift apart into the separate registers that most television settles for. He would ask, in the writer's room and in the editing room, do we believe this character would actually do this? Is this honest? Is this true to who these people are? Or is it just funny? These are not comfortable questions to ask in a comedy writer's room, where the pressure to find the laugh is constant and the laugh is the immediate, legible evidence of success. Brooks asked them anyway. The answers shaped the show. The animation was another crucial element. The decision to animate The Simpsons in a style that was, by industry standards, relatively crude and limited in its range of expression compared to theatrical animation, turned out to be an advantage rather than a limitation. Because the characters could not express complex emotions through subtle facial animation, the writing had to carry the emotional content. Because the characters were clearly drawings, not attempting photorealism, the audience was freed from certain kinds of scrutiny and was more willing to accept emotional extremes. You could make Homer cry without it feeling manipulative in the way that a live-action actor crying can feel manipulative, because Homer is transparently a drawing of a crying person, and the distance that creates is exactly the right amount of distance. The voice work compensated for what the animation couldn't do. Castellaneta and Kavner and Cartwright and Smith understood their characters at a cellular level, and they were able to find registers a specific quality of breath, a specific hesitation before a word, a specific way of getting quieter rather than louder at an emotional moment that the animation could then reinforce. The combination of voice and drawing produced something that felt, paradoxically, more emotionally true than a lot of live-action television, because it had been constructed from the ground up to carry feeling rather than simply capturing a performance that happened to occur. All of this is what made the show what it was. Not any single element, but the specific combination, held together by people who cared about doing it right and had enough creative autonomy to do it right, without being asked to make it easier or softer or more broadly accessible. The show that emerged from all of this was, in its best moments, genuinely extraordinary. Not just technically accomplished, not just funny, but honest in a way that the television medium rarely allows, and tender in a way that comedy rarely achieves, and precise in a way that only comes from people who have thought hard about who these characters are and what their lives mean. That is what you're watching when you watch The Golden Age. That is what made it different. Section 2 Extended: Homer and the Myth of the American Father. There is a particular myth that American culture tells about fathers, and it is a myth that The Simpsons was, for most of its golden age, quietly and methodically dismantling. The myth goes like this: the father is a figure of authority and provision. He brings home the money. He makes the decisions. He is, at his best, wise, a source of guidance that the family returns to when things become difficult. He may be stern, he may be distant, he may not speak the language of feeling as fluently as the mother, but he is solid. He is the foundation. Homer Simpson is not this father, and the show knows he is not this father, and the show does something radical with this knowledge. It refuses to treat his failure to match the myth as a failure of character. The show is interested in why Homer is the way he is, not just in the comedy of his inadequacy. We have talked about Abe and Mona, about the twin absences that shaped Homer's childhood. But there is a third shaping force that deserves more attention, and that is Homer's own intelligence, or rather, the specific way his intelligence was suppressed. The Crayon story, properly understood, is about the relationship between intelligence and environment. Homer, as a child, had a level of intelligence that his environment, his family, his neighborhood, his school, the specific working-class Springfield context he was raised in, was not designed to accommodate or develop. The crayon is a metaphor, but it is a metaphor for something real. The way that environments that are hostile to intelligence, that find intelligence threatening or inconvenient, or simply don't know what to do with it, find ways to suppress it. Sometimes deliberately, sometimes through neglect, sometimes through the simple accumulated weight of a world that keeps asking you to be less than you are. Homer without the crayon. The version of Homer who briefly existed after it was removed is not a different person. He is the same person with access to more of himself. The warmth is still there. The love for his family is still there. The essential Homerness is still there. But the cognitive capacity to understand his own situation, to analyze the forces operating on his life, to connect the dots between cause and effect in his own history, those things are available to him in a way they haven't been, and he can't sustain it. Not because intelligence is bad, but because intelligence, in the context Homer lives in, creates suffering. It creates the suffering of seeing the gap between what your life is and what it could have been. It creates the suffering of understanding the systems that have been operating on you, and knowing that understanding them doesn't automatically give you the power to resist them. It creates the suffering of being too aware of your own pain to be as easily distracted from it as you were before. The choice to put the crayon back in is a choice about what kind of suffering you can live with. Homer can live with the foggy suffering of a life he doesn't fully understand. He cannot live with the clear-eyed suffering of a life he understands completely and cannot change. Most people would make the same choice. Most people do make the same choice, in one form or another, because clarity about the specific contours of your own limitation is one of the hardest things to hold. This is what Homer's relationship to work is actually about. Not laziness, not stupidity. A man who has made a calculation mostly unconscious, but real about how much of his own situation he can afford to see clearly. The plant is a place he goes and does what he's told to do and collects the paycheck and comes home. The plant does not require Homer to understand himself. The plant does not require Homer to engage with the questions that would be most painful to engage with. The plant is, in its terrible way, exactly the right job for a man who has chosen the fog. Burns understands this, at some level. Burns's instinct for the specific kind of employee he needs compliant, not too bright, emotionally invested in the job for reasons that have nothing to do with the work itself, is the show's sharpest critique of the relationship between capital and labor. The ideal worker, from Burns's perspective, is exactly Homer, a man whose need for stability and belonging is so great that he will tolerate almost anything rather than risk losing the job. The more Homer needs the job emotionally, the less power Homer has to demand anything from it. Emotional vulnerability is the mechanism of labor exploitation, and Burns, ancient as he is, has had a long time to understand this mechanism. Homer's relationship with Bart is complicated by all of this, because Homer, at some level, recognizes in Bart the child he was, the kid who didn't fit, who learned to hide his real capabilities behind performance and distraction, who developed a persona designed to make the world around him legible rather than the world he actually lived in. Homer's frustration with Bart is sometimes the frustration of a parent with a child who isn't doing what they need to do, but it is also, sometimes, the frustration of a man who sees his own history being replicated and doesn't know how to interrupt it. He can't explain to Bart why he needs to do better in school, because he can't fully explain to himself what doing better would have meant for his own life. He can't tell Bart to not become Homer, because becoming Homer is what happened when the crayon went in and the environment pressed down and the choices narrowed. What Homer can do is show up, be there, love him, hold him when he cries. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, quite a lot. But it is not everything, and the show knows it is not everything. And the gap between what Homer can give and what Bart needs is one of the show's honest, unresolved tensions. Homer's relationship with Lisa is, in this light, even more interesting. Lisa is the child who escaped the fog, or rather who was never susceptible to it in the same way. Her intelligence is constitutionally resistant to suppression in the way Homer's was not, and the world has not yet found the specific mechanism that will press it down. Homer responds to this with a combination of awe and bewilderment that contains, underneath it, something that might be grief. He is watching his daughter be the person he might have been. He is watching her have access to herself in a way that he doesn't. He loves her enormously, and he doesn't quite understand her, and both of those things are completely true at once. The best episodes about Homer and Lisa are the ones that let both of those things be true simultaneously, that don't resolve the gap between them into either perfect understanding or painful estrangement, but hold it as the specific, complicated thing it is. The episodes where he shows up for her in his imperfect way, and she receives that showing up with the specific mixture of gratitude and frustration that characterizes receiving love from someone who loves you but cannot quite reach you. Those episodes are doing something that very little American family television has ever done is honestly, Homer's relationship with Marge is the show's meditation on what long-term love actually looks like, which is to say, imperfect, insufficient, sustained by daily choosing rather than romantic feeling, real in ways that are not always comfortable to look at directly. He loves her. This is the ground state of the show. But his love is not the love of someone who has done the work to understand another person deeply and is loving what he found. His love is the love of someone who is profoundly attached, who needs her in ways that go down to his bones, who would genuinely be devastated without her, but who has also, consistently, not done the work. He has not listened carefully enough. He has not thought about what she needs and worked to provide it. He has taken her maintenance of the household and the family's emotional life for granted in the specific way of someone who has never been required to imagine what would happen if that maintenance stopped. The show is honest about this, and the honesty is not comfortable. Homer is lovable and insufficient and real, and the love between him and Marge is real and is also not what it should be, and the show holds all of these truths at once without resolving them. That refusal to resolve that willingness to sit with the complicated truth rather than simplify it for the sake of comfort is what separates The Simpsons from almost everything else in its genre. And it is most visible in Homer, who is the show's most complicated figure, and also, somehow, its warmest. Section 3 Extended. What Marge Knows. There is a scene in an early season Simpsons episode where Marge is alone in the kitchen at night, the family is asleep, the house is quiet, and she is washing a dish that is already clean, washing it again, because there is nothing else to do and the motion is familiar and she is not ready to stop moving yet. The scene lasts about 4 seconds. It is not the point of the episode, but it is, in its way, the show's clearest picture of Marge's inner life. A woman who keeps working because stopping means sitting with the questions that the work keeps at bay. Marge knows things that she has not said. She knows that the life she has is not the life she imagined. She was specific about what she imagined. She has told us this, in fragments, across episodes, in the moments when the show's writers allowed her to be honest about what preceded the marriage. She imagined a career. She imagined intellectual work. She imagined a version of herself that was engaged with the world in ways that the kitchen does not permit. She gave those things up, or rather, she set them down when she got pregnant and never quite picked them back up, and the setting down became permanent without ever being decided. She also knows that she chose this. She chose Homer. She chose the family. She made the choice with the full understanding of what it would cost, or at least with as much understanding as a young person making a major life decision can have, which is partial understanding dressed up as certainty. And she knows this is the thing that the show allows Marge to know, that most shows would not, that choosing something and being at peace with having chosen it are not the same thing. She chose Homer. She is not at peace with all of what the choosing has meant. Both of these things are true. The show does not require her to pretend they are not both true. The feminist critique of Marge as a character is real and the show knows it. She is, structurally, a woman whose role is defined by what she provides to others. Her intelligence is deployed in service of the household. Her emotional labor is performed for the benefit of her family. Her desires, when they emerge, are consistently subordinated to the needs and feelings of the people around her. This is the critique. It is accurate. But the show is also doing something more complicated than simply replicating the ideology it appears to replicate, because the show will not let Marge be comfortable. It will not let her be satisfied. It keeps surfacing the cost, keeps letting her face poke through the surface of the domestic role and show you the face of a person who wanted other things and chose this and has opinions about both. Marge's most interesting moments are the moments when she is at the edge of saying what she knows, when the composure almost breaks, when the managed feeling almost escapes management. These moments are brief. They are carefully contained, but they are there, in episode after episode, like a hand pressing against the inside of a window. She knows, for instance, what Homer actually is. Not the cartoon of Homer that the show sometimes presents, the lovable disaster, the well-meaning idiot, but the actual Homer, the one she lives with daily. She knows his selfishness and his carelessness and the specific ways he is a bad partner. She knows how much more she gives to the marriage than he does. She knows this and she stays, and the show does not present this as a failure of feminist consciousness. It presents it as a decision made by a person who has decided that what she has is worth the cost of having it. This is a more interesting position than either unreflective domesticity or outright rejection of the domestic role would be. Marge is not unaware. She is not deceived. She is a woman who sees her situation clearly and chooses it anyway, and that choosing clearly is something that many women watching the show recognize and that the show honors. The episodes where Marge's professional ambitions are engaged are the show's attempt to work through the question it keeps raising. What would it mean for Marge to have more? Not to leave, not to abandon the family, but to have a version of self outside the household that is not immediately sacrificed to the household's needs? The show keeps raising this question. It keeps failing to answer it. This failure is itself the answer. In a way, it is the show's honest acknowledgement that there is no version of the family sitcom format in which Marge can pursue her ambitions without that pursuit eventually becoming about what she gives up, rather than what she gains. The format will not allow it. The family sitcom requires the domestic center to hold, but the holding costs something. And the show insists on making the cost visible, even when it can't do anything about the cost itself. That insistence is Marge's dignity. The show gives her that much. There is something specific about what Julie Kavner brings to the role that is worth naming. Kavner's voice is unusual, a specific quality of controlled emotion, a sound that seems always to be managing something, that makes every line Marge delivers feel like it contains more than it says. This is not a conventional television voice. It is not a voice that the audience is supposed to be comfortable with. It is the voice of someone who is always slightly on the edge of something, on the edge of saying more, of feeling more, of letting the management slip just a little. That quality, sustained across hundreds of episodes, produces a Marge whose interior is always subtly present. Even in the most purely comedic scenes, even in the background of an episode that is not about her, Kavner's voice carries the weight of everything Marge knows and has chosen not to say. You can hear it. You know it's there. And you understand, without it being stated, that the woman making that sound has a whole life inside her that the show is only occasionally allowed to show. That is Marge's gift to The Simpsons and Kavner's gift to Marge, the sense of a complete person, present in every scene, carrying everything she knows. Section 4 Extended. The system that made Bart. To understand Bart Simpson, you have to understand the specific kind of failure that the American school system is capable of producing. It is not the dramatic failure of the uncaring teacher or the abusive administrator. Those failures are real, but they are legible, visible, easily identified as failures, and therefore, in principle, correctable. The failure that Springfield Elementary represents, the failure that Bart embodies, is subtler and more systematic. The failure of a system that is designed to produce certain kinds of children and simply has no mechanism for recognizing or developing the kinds of capabilities that don't fit the design. Bart is not a stupid child. The show is explicit about this in ways that the public discourse around the character almost entirely ignored. He is a child with specific capabilities: social intelligence, physical daring, creative problem-solving, a performer's instinct for what will engage an audience that are invisible to the institutions he passes through because those institutions are not looking for them. The standardized test measures certain things. Bart's capabilities are not among those things. This is not a failure of Bart. This is a failure of the test. But the school doesn't know how to make that distinction, and so it processes Bart as a failure, and Bart, who has learned to believe the institutions that process him, begins to process himself as a failure too. This is the critical moment, and the show returns to it again and again with a care that suggests the writers understood something important. The moment when a child incorporates the institution's judgment of them as their own self-judgment is the moment when damage begins to compound. Bart is not born believing he is stupid. He learns to believe it. He learns it from Mrs. Krabappel's exhausted contempt and Skinner's bureaucratic efficiency and the accumulated weight of years of being processed as a problem. What the show does with this, what makes the Bart storylines in the Golden Age so interesting, is refuse to let the processing be the whole story. There is always, in the best Bart episodes, a moment when you see him from outside the institutional frame, and what you see is different. You see a child who is fully present, fully engaged, fully capable within a context that is not the classroom. You see the intelligence and the creativity and the social skill that the school cannot see, being deployed in ways the school has not sanctioned, but that are real. The con artist episodes are the clearest expression of this. When Bart runs a scheme, whether it's faking a broken leg or selling factory seconds or engineering some elaborate social manipulation, he brings to the scheme a level of planning, execution, and improvisational adjustment that would be impressive in an adult. He reads people. He anticipates responses. He adapts when the plan encounters resistance. He is doing, in the service of schemes that are usually mischievous and occasionally actually harmful, exactly the things that the school is supposed to be teaching but failing to develop. The tragedy is not that Bart is a con artist. The tragedy is that the capabilities that make him a good con artist are capabilities that nobody legitimate has ever offered to develop in him. Nobody has ever come to Bart and said, "You are good at reading people. You are good at communication. You are good at thinking on your feet. Here is how to use those things in ways that are actually good for you and for the people around you." Nobody has offered him that because the school cannot see those things, and the school is the only institution in his life that is supposed to be developing him. Homer tries. He tries in the imperfect way of a man who is not sure what Bart needs but is sure that he needs something. His attempts at guidance are usually fumbling, usually too late, usually arrived at through the specific logic of a man who is managing his own unprocessed wounds while trying to help someone else with theirs. But they are real. The hug in Bart gets an F is real. The moments when Homer shows up physically, emotionally, unexpectedly are real, and they mean more to Bart than any institutional response, precisely because they are not institutional. They are personal. They are a specific person choosing, specifically, to reach for him. The show's treatment of Bart's relationship to school has a political dimension that it only occasionally makes explicit. Springfield Elementary is not a particularly bad school by the standards of what American public schools actually are. It is underfunded, overcrowded, staffed by people who are doing the best they can within a system that gives them very little to work with. Mrs. Krabappel is not a bad person. She is a person who has been worn down by decades of trying to teach in conditions that make real teaching nearly impossible, and who has retreated to a position of minimal engagement as a survival strategy. You cannot hate her for this. You can mourn it. Skinner is not a bad person either. He is a person who has organized his entire existence around a system that he has no power to fundamentally change, and who manages within that system, through the enforcement of order, that he has confused with the development of children. The order is real and the children are real, and the confusion between them is the damage. What Bart does with all of this, his response to the institutional damage, is construct a self that is entirely external. He becomes, deliberately, the most visible possible version of himself. The behavior, the catchphrases, the skateboard, the performances of misbehavior, all of it is a way of saying, if you are going to see me as a problem, I will be the most spectacular version of the problem that the world has ever seen. The defiance is real. The bravado is real, and both of them are, in a very specific sense, an achievement. They are a child's way of maintaining dignity in a system that has defined him as lacking it. But they are also a cost. The Bart who performs non-compliance is not the Bart who cries when he fails the test despite trying. Those two Barts coexist, and the distance between them is the distance between the self the system sees and the self that is actually there. Keeping up the performance requires energy. The real Bart is hiding behind it, scared and trying and, occasionally, in the right circumstances, visible. Those moments of visibility when the performance drops and the real child is there are the moments the show loves most and treats most carefully. They are brief. They are usually occasioned by something extreme, by a genuine crisis, by a moment of unexpected tenderness, by the arrival of someone who sees through the performance and responds to what's behind it. They don't last. The performance reconstitutes itself quickly. But they are real, and the show insists on their reality. And that insistence is what makes Bart more than a cartoon troublemaker. He is a cartoon troublemaker whose real self is visible, and that visibility is what we mean when we say a character is alive. The school failed him. His neighborhood failed him. The institutional structure of his childhood failed him in ways that have real consequences for who he becomes. And the show is honest about this. It does not pretend that love alone is sufficient to compensate for structural failure, does not pretend that Homer's hug in a hospital waiting room undoes the years of being processed as a problem. The hug matters. The hug is real. But it is not the same as a system that saw him clearly and gave him what he needed to become the person he could have been. That gap between what the love gives and what the structure fails to give is the most honest thing the show says about childhood and about the children who fall through the cracks of every system designed to catch them. Constantly being renegotiated, and the negotiation produced something that neither pure comedy nor pure drama could have produced on its own. That is the architecture of a perfect Simpsons episode. It is not a formula. It is a discipline. And the discipline, sustained across seasons and hundreds of episodes, produced a body of work that has not been equaled in American television comedy. Section 12 extended. Springfield after the end that never came. The Simpsons was supposed to end. Not officially, there was never a formal announcement, never a writer's room discussion that produced the decision to stop. But there were years, in the early 2000s and again in the mid-2010s, when it seemed like it might, when the quality had declined enough, and the cultural conversation had moved enough, and the people who made it best had left for long enough, that stopping seemed like the natural thing. The thing a show with self-respect would do. It didn't stop. And the not stopping has been one of the more interesting cultural phenomena of the past 20 years, because the show that continues to air is genuinely different from the show that people remember, and the gap between the two things, the show that was and the show that is, has become part of the cultural meaning of The Simpsons in a way that the creators almost certainly did not intend. The show that was is the golden age we have been discussing. It is in the permanent canon. It is the thing that gets referenced, that gets quoted, that gets discussed in the serious pieces about American television comedy. It is what the show was when it was best. And its best was genuinely extraordinary, a sustained peak of creative achievement that stands as one of the finest things that American popular culture has ever produced. The show that is the post-Golden Age Simpsons that has been airing for going on 2 decades now is something else. It is competent, it is occasionally funny. It produces, in a good season, a handful of episodes that are genuinely strong. But it no longer has the thing that the Golden Age had, which is the integration of comedy and emotional truth that made the best episodes work at multiple levels simultaneously. What happened? The answer that most people give is turnover. The specific combination of writers who made the Golden Age was not permanent. People left. Conan O'Brien left early. Mike Scully took over as showrunner in season 9, and the show shifted. The specific sensibility that George Meyer and John Swartzwelder and their collaborators had built was distributed, generalized, diluted by the addition of new writers who could match the comedy but could not fully match the emotional ambition. The later seasons are funnier than their reputation suggests. The jokes are still good, but they have lost the underlying commitment to truth that gave the Golden Age its specific weight. This is partly a structural problem. The emotional weight of the Golden Age depended on specific knowledge of these characters, built up over years of careful character work. That knowledge was always somewhat precarious. It existed in the heads of the specific people who had done the work, and when those people left, the knowledge went with them. The new writers knew the characters in the way you know a public figure, from what they've read, from the archive, from the general reputation. They did not know them in the way the original writers knew them, from the inside, from years of thinking about who these people were and why they did what they did. The result is the specific failure mode of the later seasons, episodes that are funny but feel hollow, because the jokes are not in service of any real understanding of the characters. The Homer of the later seasons does things that are funny but that the Homer of the Golden Age would not do, because the later Homer has been simplified, reduced to a collection of comic traits rather than maintained as a full person. The comedy is still there. The person has gone slightly out of focus. But here is the thing that the decline narrative misses, or at least underemphasizes. The later seasons also did some things that the Golden Age could not do, or would not do, precisely because they were liberated from the emotional ambition that was the Golden Age's greatest achievement and also its greatest constraint. The Treehouse of Horror episodes, the annual Halloween anthology that exists completely outside the show's normal continuity, became increasingly strange and inventive in the later seasons, freed from the obligation to say anything true about the characters. The show got weirder, formally, in ways that are sometimes genuinely interesting. The celebrity cameos became more self-aware, the meta-references more explicit, the show's willingness to acknowledge its own mythology more pronounced. None of this compensates for the loss of what the Golden Age had, but it is not nothing. The later seasons are a different show from the Golden Age, and if you evaluate them as that different show as a long-running animated comedy with a specific history, trying to continue in the absence of the specific combination of talent and circumstance that made its best years possible, they are less of a failure and more of an inevitability. The show that exists now is the custodian of something. It keeps the characters alive. It keeps Springfield populated. It maintains the formal existence of the world that the Golden Age built, in the same way that a historic building is maintained even when its original function has changed, not because the maintenance makes the building what it was when it was built, but because the building still means something, and the meaning is preserved by the maintenance. That is what The Simpsons is now, the custodian of its own legacy. Not the thing itself, but the thing that keeps the thing present. And the thing it is custodian of the 20-odd years of episodes that the Golden Age produced, the portraits of Homer's grief and Marge's invisible labor, and Bart's defended heart, and Lisa's stubborn clarity, that thing is permanent. It does not require the later seasons to be good. It does not require the show to continue indefinitely. It requires only that it existed, and it did, and the existing is enough. The reason we cannot let The Simpsons end is the reason we cannot let anything that mattered end, because ending would transform it from present to past, from ongoing to finished, from something that is still happening to something that happened, and we are not ready for what happened to be the only version of the thing. We are not ready for Springfield to be over. Springfield was the place where the American family was honest about itself, for a few years, in a form that was funny enough to be bearable and true enough to matter. Springfield was where Homer carried his grief and loved his family and chose the fog because the alternative was worse. Springfield was where Marge managed everything and was seen doing the managing, at least partially, at least more than most. Springfield was where Bart was failed by every system and loved by his father anyway, imperfectly enough. Springfield was where Lisa played the saxophone in the dark, and the notes went up into the air above a town that could not quite hear them, but played them anyway. These things happened. They were put into the world. They cannot be taken back. That is what we are protecting when we keep watching. Not the quality of the current episodes. Not the consistency of the continuity. Not even the characters. Exactly, the characters have changed enough over the decades that the Homer of season 32 is genuinely a different person from the Homer of season 4, in ways that matter. What we are protecting is the record. The specific archive of truth that those early seasons created, about what it is like to be alive in a family and a class and a country and a time, about the specific weight of the specific life, about love as a practice rather than a feeling, as a daily choosing rather than a state of grace. We keep watching because the record is still there, still alive, still accessible. Because you can turn on season 4 right now and Homer is on the edge of Bart's bed in the dark and the conversation that fails to happen is happening and it is still true and it is still you, somehow, in that room. You are Homer, you are Bart. You are the thing that cannot be said and the thing that is felt anyway. You are the imperfect love that holds. And Springfield is still there, in the only way that places that matter are still there. Not as a location, not as a real town on a map that exists in a state, but as a place that lives in the people who have been there. In the specific way that watching those episodes created something real in the people who watched them, a relationship, an understanding, a texture of emotional knowledge that would not exist without the show. We carry Springfield. We carry Homer's grief and Marge's composure, and Bart's bravado, and Lisa's saxophone. We carry the couch gag and the donuts and the plant and Moe's bar, and the specific quality of light in the Springfield sky at the end of an episode when everything has been resolved, imperfectly, for now. We carry it and it changes us, and we carry what we've been changed into, and the show keeps existing, and the loop continues, and Springfield remains, somehow, the most real fictional town in America, the most honest, the most true. It was never just a cartoon. It was the place where American working-class life looked at itself and found, underneath everything, underneath the anxiety and the failure and the institutional betrayal, and the environmental poisoning, and the corruption, and the daily grind of making it work, love. Impractical, insufficient, persistent, real love. It found love. It put it on television. It did this for years, disguised as a comedy, and people watched it and felt something they did not always have words for, and came back the next week and felt it again. That is the whole show. That is what it was for. And the reason it never ended is the reason the best things never quite end. Because they are not complete. Because the love they document is not complete. Because as long as there are families struggling in company towns under the shadow of things they cannot control, trying to hold together in conditions designed to pull them apart, as long as that is true, which is to say forever, the story of The Simpsons is not finished. The couch is still there. The family is still assembling. The credits will roll and everything will reset, and next week Homer will be back at the plant, and Marge will be in the kitchen, and Bart will be on the skateboard, and Lisa will be playing the saxophone. And the notes will go up into the air above Springfield, above the water tower and the nuclear plant, and Moe's bar and the elementary school and the church, and the houses of all the people we know and all the people we don't, and the notes will go out into the dark. And if you are somewhere out there listening, wherever you are, whatever time it is, whatever weight you are carrying tonight, the notes are for you. They have always been for you. That is The Simpsons. That is what it always was. Good night, Springfield. End of script. Section 13. The episodes that break the rules. There are certain Simpsons episodes that operate outside the show's normal grammar. Not outside the show's setting, they are still set in Springfield, still feature the regular cast, still end with the credits rolling over the same theme. But they break the implicit contract about what a Simpsons episode is allowed to do, what it is allowed to feel like, how far it is allowed to go before the comedy is required to pull things back to safety. These are the episodes that the show's most devoted fans return to most often, and they are the episodes that reveal most clearly what the show was actually capable of at its best. Not the funniest episodes, though many of them are very funny. The most honest ones. The ones that got further into the actual experience of being alive than the format was supposed to allow. Homer versus Patty and Selma from Season 6 is an episode that most people remember for its comedy. Homer working as a limo driver, wearing a fake mustache, being humiliated at every turn. But buried inside the comedy is a story about pride and its costs, about the specific difficulty of asking for help from people who resent you, about the humiliation of financial failure and what it does to a man's sense of himself. Homer has failed at a financial venture he has invested badly, lost money the family cannot afford to lose, and is now in the position of having to borrow from Marge's sisters, who despise him, to keep the family afloat. His pride screams at him not to do this. His responsibility to his family requires that he do it anyway. He does it. He submits to Patty and Selma's contempt, does the job, takes the money, and the episode ends not with vindication but with the quiet dignity of a man who did what he had to do because it was what he had to do. That specific dignity, the dignity of doing the humiliating thing because it is required, not triumphantly, but just doing it, is something that American entertainment almost never depicts. It is not dramatic. It does not resolve into recognition or triumph. It is just a man swallowing his pride and taking care of his family and going home. The episode respects this enough not to give Homer a redemptive moment. He is not vindicated. He is not celebrated. He did the right thing because it was right. And that was enough. And the episode knows that that has to be enough. One Fish, Two Fish, Blowfish, Bluefish from Season 2 is the episode where Homer eats a potentially fatal piece of fugu sushi and believes he has 24 hours to live. The episode is, structurally, a meditation on what matters. Homer makes a list of things he wants to do before he dies, and the episode tracks him through the list, noting which things he manages and which things he lets go. He watches the sunrise with Bart. He makes a recording for Maggie for when she grows up. He makes peace with his father. He has one last night with Marge. What the episode captures, with a precision that most treatments of mortality don't achieve, is the specific way that the knowledge of death clarifies what was always true. Homer does not discover, in his last 24 hours, new values that he didn't have before. He discovers that the values he had were already the right ones. His family, the specific, ordinary moments of a shared life. The sunrise, Marge's face in the dark. These were always the things that mattered. He just didn't attend to them as carefully as their importance deserved, because he thought there was more time. The episode ends with Homer not dying. The fugu was safe after all, and the final scene is Homer sitting on the couch watching television at 5 a.m., having spent his entire last night in a way that was exactly right. He is not chastened. He does not carry the lesson forward into a reformed life. By the next episode, he will be as careless as he always was. The show knows this. The show knows that insight does not translate automatically into changed behavior, that you can know something is true and still fail to live accordingly, that the human capacity for self-deception and distraction is more powerful than almost anything else. But the night itself was real. The watching of the sunrise with Bart was real. The recording for Maggie was real. The love that organized those choices was real, and the episode honored that reality without pretending it would last in any simple form. Stark Raving Dad, the Season 3 premiere, is the episode where Homer is sent to a mental institution and meets a large white man who believes he is Michael Jackson. The episode is ostensibly a comedy about mistaken identity, but what it is actually about is Lisa's birthday and what it means to be loved specifically. Bart, who has never been particularly attentive to his sister's emotional needs, helps the man claiming to be Michael Jackson write a birthday song for Lisa. The song is simple and a little silly, and it is exactly the right thing. And when Lisa receives it, the show allows the moment to be genuinely moving in a way that catches you off guard. What the episode is doing in that moment is something the show does at its best. It is using an absurd situation, a large white man claiming to be Michael Jackson, writing a birthday song to get at something real about the relationship between Bart and Lisa, and about the specific way that imperfect love can find forms of expression that are exactly right despite everything. Bart cannot give Lisa what she needs most of the time. In this episode, Through this improbable channel, he gives her something real. The absurdity is the delivery mechanism. The feeling underneath it is true. Summer of 4 feet. 2. The season 7 finale is perhaps the most quietly perfect episode in the series. An episode so understated, so gentle in its emotional ambition, that it is easy to watch without fully registering what it has done to you. Lisa, on the family's summer vacation, leaves behind her Springfield identity, the overachiever, the teacher's pet, the girl who is always right, and reinvents herself as a normal kid. She makes friends, she is liked, she is, for the duration of the episode, the person she has always wanted to be in the social sense, accepted, included, part of a group. The episode's central tension is between this new identity and the old one, personified by Bart who, because he is Bart, threatens to expose the truth. And the episode's resolution is, in its way, a small miracle. The new friends already know, and they like her anyway. They knew she was smart, knew she was different from what she presented, and chose her anyway. This should be the triumphant ending. Lisa has been accepted. The thing she most wanted has been given to her, and the show lets it be beautiful. But it also lets Marge say something to Lisa that is the episode's real point. That the friends she has in Springfield, who know her fully and choose her anyway, are the more important thing. That the summer friends are real but partial, they chose a version of her. The Springfield friends, imperfect as their choosing is, chose more of her than that. The episode does not resolve Lisa's loneliness. It contextualizes it. It says, the loneliness is real, and the moments when it lifts are real, and the lifting does not mean the loneliness was wrong to feel. It was the correct response to a real absence. The absence is still there, but so are the people who chose her anyway, however imperfectly. That is the specific emotional register that the Golden Age hit over and over again in these episodes that break the rules. Not resolution, not triumph, not the correction of the problem, but the recognition of what is real alongside the problem, the love alongside the grief, the choosing alongside the inadequacy of the choosing. Both things true, neither canceling the other. This is harder to achieve than either pure comedy or pure drama, because it requires holding two emotional registers simultaneously without letting either dominate. The Golden Age, at its best, did this with a consistency that was genuinely extraordinary. The episodes that break the rules are the ones where the holding was most complete, where you could not, watching them, locate the seam between the funny and the sad, because there was no seam. They were the same thing. Section 14. The Sound of Springfield. There is something about the music of The Simpsons that does not get discussed as often as the writing or the animation, and it is a significant omission because the music is doing a great deal of work in the emotional economy of the show. Alf Clausen composed the score for The Simpsons from Season 2 through Season 27, and the specific quality of his work, orchestral, melodically rich, able to modulate between comedy and genuine emotion in a single cue, is inseparable from what the show feels like. The music is not ironic. It is not, for the most part, playing against the emotion on screen. It is supporting it, sometimes amplifying it beyond what the animation and the voice performances alone could achieve. The music at the end of Mother Simpson, the cue that plays over Homer sitting on his car, looking at the stars after his mother's car has gone, is simple and quiet and devastating. And it is doing work that the animation cannot do. The animation can show you Homer's face. The music can tell you what Homer is feeling in a way that the face, however expressively drawn, cannot fully convey. The music reaches into the moment and holds it, extends it, gives it a weight that transforms a scene from emotionally significant to genuinely cathartic. This is what a good television score does, and it is something that comedy scores almost never do, because comedy scores are generally in the business of punctuating jokes rather than holding emotions. Clausen was doing something more unusual, writing music that could serve both functions, could underline a joke and 2 minutes later be genuinely moving, without the transitions feeling jarring. The grammar of the score is the grammar of the show. It can hold comedy and feeling simultaneously, because it was written to do both. The show's theme, composed by Danny Elfman, is so deeply embedded in the culture that it has become almost invisible. It is just the sound of The Simpsons, unremarkable, familiar, the thing that tells you what you're about to watch. But listen to it carefully, without the distraction of familiarity. It has a specific quality. It is playful and bright and slightly anxious, with a quality of forward motion that is also a quality of barely controlled chaos. It sounds like a family running toward a couch they might not quite reach in time. It sounds like Springfield. The music that plays in the opening sequence, as the characters arrive at the couch, changes every episode, different arrangements, different speeds, different styles, and this variability is itself significant. The theme is constant, but the arrangement is not, which means that the opening of every episode is simultaneously familiar and slightly new. You know where you are, but you don't know quite what you're going to get. This is the show's grammar encoded in its music. Springfield is always Springfield, but Springfield is always slightly different from what you expected. Lisa's saxophone is the show's most consistent musical motif, and it carries meanings that accumulate across seasons. The saxophone is, formally, an unusual instrument for a cartoon child character. It is an adult instrument, complex in its technique, requiring years of practice to play well. The saxophone does not fit the setting in the way that Lisa herself does not fit the setting. But the show treats her playing with absolute seriousness, as the expression of a genuine musical capability, and the music that plays when she plays usually a bluesy, searching melody is the sound of Lisa's interior life in a way that nothing else in the show quite matches. When Lisa plays in the opening sequence, perched on a chair in what looks like a school band class, and the sequence cuts away from her mid-note, the cut is one of the show's recurring small jokes. She starts to play, the sequence moves on before she finishes, and the note hangs in the air, unresolved. This is funny, and it is also exactly right. Lisa's music is always slightly unfinished, always reaching towards something it hasn't quite arrived at. The cut is the show's acknowledgement of this. She is still playing even after the shot has moved on. The music continues somewhere off-screen, in the space between what the show shows you and what it leaves for you to imagine. The sound design more broadly, the specific texture of Springfield's audio world, from the hum of the nuclear plant that runs under many exterior scenes, to the specific quality of bar noise at Moe's, to the school bell that marks the beginning and end of every Springfield elementary day, is part of what makes the town feel inhabited rather than constructed. You know where you are not just because of what you see, but because of what you hear. Springfield has a sonic identity as specific as its visual identity, and the combination of the two creates the sense of a real place. Music in the show is also often directly about what the characters are feeling in ways that the dialogue does not state. When Homer is genuinely happy when he is with his family in a moment of uncomplicated warmth, the music reflects this with a simplicity and warmth that the show does not usually allow itself. The cues that accompany Homer and Marge dancing together, or Homer watching his children sleep, or the family around the dinner table in a good moment, these cues are not ironic, not undercut by comedy, just warm, just present, just there with the characters and the feeling. This musical directness is part of what makes those moments land. The show is not winking at you. It is not putting the warmth in quotation marks with a comedic music cue that signals to the audience that it knows this is sentimental. It is just being warm. And the music holds the warmth without apology, and the result is the specific combination of sincerity and sophistication that is the show's signature at its best. Section 15. What Springfield Knows About America. Let us take stock of what this town knows. Springfield knows that the American middle class is more precarious than it looks. That the specific comfort of the two-car family with the owned house and the children in public school is always closer to the edge than the mythology suggests. And that the edge is not an imaginary thing, it is specific and real, and many people have fallen off it, and the people who haven't know, at some level, that they could. Springfield knows that institutions, schools, churches, governments, hospitals, police departments are built by human beings with particular interests, and that those interests are not always aligned with the interests of the people the institutions are supposed to serve. That the gap between what institutions claim to do and what they actually do is often enormous, and that the people inside those institutions are often aware of the gap and do not know what to do about it, and often make their peace with it in ways that cost them something. Springfield knows that rich people are different from poor people in ways that go beyond money. That significant, sustained wealth changes what you think is possible, what you think is acceptable, what you think other people deserve from the world. That Mr. Burns is not an aberration. He is the logical conclusion of a system that has always produced Mr. Burnses, that requires the production of Mr. Burnses to function as designed, and that the Mr. Burnses of the world do not see themselves as villains, but as people who have simply done what the world they were born into rewarded. Springfield knows that love, the specific, particular, impractical, insufficient, persistent love of specific people for each other, is the thing that holds. That it does not solve problems, that it does not correct injustices or repair institutions or make the world more fair, but that in the specific life of the specific person, in the specific household where it is practiced daily and imperfectly, it is the difference between a life that is bearable and a life that isn't. That Homer's love for his family, for all its inadequacy, for all the ways it falls short of what his family needs, is what makes Homer Homer and Springfield and the show worth watching. Springfield knows that children are people, not projects. That the ways a child develops, the capabilities they have, the wounds they carry, the specific person they become, these things are not produced by their parents alone, but by the full complexity of everything that acts on them. The family, yes, but also the school and the neighborhood and the economic conditions and the specific moment in history and the particular combination of luck and circumstance that no amount of parenting can fully control. That Bart's struggles and Lisa's loneliness are not simply failures of Homer and Marge, though Homer and Marge contribute to them. They are also the product of Springfield Elementary and the nuclear plant's economic dominance, and the specific culture of a specific American town in a specific historical moment. Springfield knows that faith, the various forms that faith takes in the various people of this town, from Homer's direct and transactional relationship with God to Ned's tested and tested again commitment to Lisa's earnest Buddhism, is not stupid. That the people who believe things are not simply believing because they haven't thought about it clearly enough. That belief is a response to the real features of human life, the contingency, the suffering, the love that persists without explanation, the grace that operates without announcing itself, and that the belief is as rational a response to those features as the rejection of belief, which is also a response to the same real things. Springfield knows that the family is not the solution to anything, that it does not protect you from economic precarity or institutional failure or environmental damage or the specific cruelties of a society that rewards the wealthy and punishes the rest. That the family is itself a site of harm, as well as a site of love, that the same household can be the source of a child's deepest wounds and the source of their deepest belonging. That these things coexist, always, in every family, and the television that pretends they don't is lying about what family is. And Springfield knows this is the thing it knows most, consistently, across all its seasons and all its failures and all the ways it declined from its best, that in the middle of all of this, in the middle of the precarity and the institutional failure, and the environmental damage and the family wounds, there is something worth having. There is the Saturday morning when Homer and Bart are alone in the house and they watch cartoons together and eat cereal out of the box. There is the Tuesday evening when Marge and Homer are in the backyard and the children are in bed and the night is warm and they do not say anything for a while. There is Lisa playing the saxophone in her room, the sound going out under the door and down the hall and into the night. There is Maggie in her crib, asleep, small, entirely herself. Springfield knows that these moments are not enough. In the accounting that takes the full measure of a life and finds it adequate or inadequate against some standard, they are not enough to compensate for everything else. They are also all there is. And the knowledge that they are all there is, combined with the love that makes them possible, is the thing that the show has been saying in 1,000 different ways. Since the 17th of December 1989, it is enough to love the people in your house. It is not enough to save the world. Both of those things are true. You do both anyway, as best you can, and the doing is the life. Springfield knows this. The Simpsons knew this. The show was always, underneath everything, telling you this. And now you know it too. Section 16, The Long Goodbye. Television has specific rituals of ending. The series finale, the last episode, the final curtain. Most long-running shows build to this moment, shape their final seasons around it, try to give their characters endings that feel earned and their audiences endings that feel satisfying. They say goodbye. They acknowledge that something is over. They allow the permanent present tense of the ongoing series to become the past tense of the completed story. The Simpsons has not done this. The Simpsons has been in the permanent present tense for 35 years, and as long as the show continues to air, it will remain in the permanent present tense because the show has made the refusal to end into one of its defining characteristics. This refusal is, as we have discussed, partly commercial and partly something more than commercial. But it is also, in its way, an artistic statement, a choice about what this particular story is and what it requires. Some stories need to end. Some stories end in the telling. The Simpsons is a story that has decided, whether consciously or by default, that its ending would not be the right kind of truth. The right kind of truth, for this story, is the permanent present. The family always on the couch, the plant always humming, the bar always open, Springfield always Springfield. Because the story this show has been telling is not the story of these specific characters moving through time toward a specific destination. It is the story of a family that exists, that loves each other, that struggles with the same things generation after generation, that keeps going because stopping is not what families do. Families do not end. They change, and people leave, and people die, and children grow up and have children of their own, and eventually everything that constituted the family in its original form is gone, but the family continues in the people it produced and the love it passed forward and the specific marks it left on the world. A family is not a story with a beginning and a middle and an end. It is a process, an ongoing thing, a structure that persists through change because the love that constitutes it is more durable than any specific configuration. The Simpsons is the story of that process, not of a journey from one place to another, of the daily re-choosing of what matters. If the show were to end, if there were a series finale that put a period at the end of the sentence, what would we lose? We would lose the permanent present. We would lose the sense that Springfield is still there, that the family is still assembled on the couch, that Homer is still at the plant, and Marge is still in the kitchen, and Bart is still on the skateboard, and Lisa is still playing the saxophone. We would have a completed artifact instead of an ongoing one, and the completed artifact would be a different thing from what the show currently is. Whether that different thing would be better is a question without a single answer. There are people who believe that a great series finale would give the show a weight and a meaning that its endless continuation has diluted. There are people who believe that the continuation is itself, the point that the refusal to end is the show's most honest statement about what families and towns and the things we love most are. I find myself with the second group, though I hold it lightly. What I believe is that Springfield was never meant to be a place that ends. It was meant to be a place that persists, not perfectly, not without change or decline, but persisting. As working-class American life persists, as families persist, as the love that holds things together persists even when everything else is falling apart. The fact that Springfield is still on the air, that you can turn on the television on a Sunday night and find Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa still there, still themselves, still in the house that is always slightly in need of repair, this fact is, in its own strange way, the show keeping its promise. The promise was never quality. Exactly. The promise was presence. The promise was, we will be here. Week after week, season after season, we will be here. And you can come home. Springfield is still there. The family is still assembled. The bar is still open, and Mo is behind it, and the light is still yellow, and it is still the place where the people who have nowhere better to go, go. The plant is still humming, and Homer is still there, and the safety inspector is still not quite safe, and the donuts are still in the break room, and somewhere in the machinery of the thing, there is still the memory of a man who once had a crayon in his brain and chose the fog over the clarity and went home to his family because that was the only thing that mattered. Marge is still in the kitchen, and her hair is still up, and she is still managing everything, and somewhere inside the managing there is still the memory of the young woman who wanted something more and made peace with something different and finds, in the making of that peace, something she would not trade. Bart is still 10 years old, and the skateboard is still under his feet, and the 10-year-old who is actually trying is still there behind the performance. And someday, in a flash forward that the show will never commit to, in a future that exists only in what we imagine for him, he will be okay. He will figure it out. He will be the person that all that trying was building toward. And Lisa is still 8 years old, and the saxophone is still in her hands, and the notes are still going up into the air above Springfield, above the water tower and the plant and the church and the school, up into the dark, searching. They are always searching. The notes are always going up. The music is always just slightly unfinished, always reaching towards something it hasn't arrived at yet. Always, and this is the thing, this is the whole thing, always still playing. As long as the show is still on, as long as Springfield persists in its impossible, beloved, slightly toxic, radioactively lit, floating timelined, reset button permanent present, the music is still playing. And we are still listening. Section 17. A final letter to Springfield. There is a tradition in long-form storytelling of the writer addressing the world they've created at the end, acknowledging it, thanking it, letting it go. This is not quite that. Springfield doesn't need to be let go. Springfield doesn't let itself be let go. But there is something to say. At the end of this long walk through its streets and its seasons and its particular way of being true, that does not fit neatly into a section about the show's economics or its theology or the architecture of its perfect episodes. What The Simpsons gave to the people who watched it gave in the specific way that things we carry become part of us, that the shows and songs and books that reach us when we are young become part of the infrastructure of the self, is something that is hard to name without overreaching. It is not simply entertainment, though it is also that. It is not simply art, though it is also that. It is something more specific and more personal than those categories allow. It is the experience of being seen. Not literally the show did not know you, did not make its episodes with you specifically in mind. But the show was made by people who understood something about the experience of being alive in a family, in a working-class context, in the specific America of the late 20th century, and who put that understanding on screen with a precision and an honesty that was unusual and still is. And when you watched it, when something in an episode reached across the distance between the fictional Springfield and your actual life, and made contact, what you felt was the specific relief of being understood, this is what the best stories do. They do not tell you things you didn't already know. They tell you things you knew but couldn't quite say, things you felt but couldn't quite name. They put words and images and music around the unnamed thing, and the thing becomes nameable, and the naming is a kind of relief. You are not alone in feeling this. Someone else felt it and made something about it. The something exists. You can return to it. The Simpsons, at its best, was that something. For a generation of people who grew up in houses like the Simpson house, people who recognized the plant and the bar and the school, people whose parents were Homer and Marge in ways that were not flattering but were true, the show was that something. The thing that named the unnamed. The thing that said, this is what it looks like, from the inside. This is the weight. This is also the warmth. Both things at once. Go back to Season 4, go back to Season 5, go back to any of the episodes we have discussed, or any of the dozens we haven't had space for. Watch the scene you remember, the one that got you, the first time you really felt it, the one that lodged somewhere in the middle of your chest and hasn't fully left. Watch it again. See if it still works. It will still work. The best ones always still work. Because what they were doing was not contingent on the moment, not a comment on a specific cultural context that has since changed, not a joke that requires knowledge of a reference that has faded. What they were doing was reaching for something permanent, the specific texture of love in a household, the specific weight of failure in a life, the specific grace of a moment when imperfect people manage to reach each other across the distance that imperfection creates. That is permanent. That is the thing that does not age. The yellow skin ages. In a sense, it becomes more familiar, less striking. The floating timeline becomes more obviously a convention. The catchphrases become archaeological artifacts of a specific cultural moment. But the scene on the edge of Bart's bed in the dark does not age. Homer on his car looking at the stars does not age. Lisa playing the saxophone while the credits roll on Moaning Lisa does not age. These things happened. They were made. They are in the world, and they will remain in the world for as long as there are ways to watch them. And the people who watch them will feel what the people who first watched them felt, because the feeling they reach for is not historical. It is not contingent on any specific time or place or cultural context. It is the feeling of being in a family. The feeling of loving someone imperfectly and knowing it and loving them anyway. The feeling of carrying weight and finding, in spite of everything, warmth. Springfield, the most real fictional town in America. the place that knows us best. It was never just a cartoon. It was always, underneath, a love letter. From the writers who cared enough to be honest, to the audience that deserved the honesty. From the family on the couch to every family watching from their own couch. From Springfield to everywhere. With love. Imperfect, insufficient, persistent, real love. The kind that holds. End of script. Section 18. The things Homer did right. We spend a lot of time in the cultural conversation about The Simpsons, cataloging Homer's failures, the explosions, the accidents, the spectacular incompetence, the sleep-eating, the strangling, the episodes where his self-centeredness produces consequences that affect everyone around him and that he fails to fully understand until too late. All of this is real and the show earns the comedy of it. But there is another accounting, one that the show keeps making in the margins of the disaster narrative, that deserves equal attention. The things Homer did right, the times he showed up, the moments when the man underneath the cartoon was present and real, and exactly what his family needed. He went to Bart's talent show, even though he was tired. He stayed until the end, even when Bart's performance was going badly, and he clapped, and the clapping mattered. He drove to the school at 2 a.m. when Lisa forgot something she needed for a project, and he didn't make her feel bad about it. He just drove. He sat in the car outside the school on the last day of second grade, waiting because Lisa had said she might need him and he wanted to be there in case she did. He learned the guitar solo he thought Marge wanted to hear, even though it was hard and he wasn't any good at it. He stood in the kitchen and played it for her, badly, and she laughed, and he laughed, and it was exactly right. He told Bart he was proud of him. Not enough times, not consistently enough, not in the right moments, but he told him. He said it out loud. He looked at his son and said the words. He made Maggie a stuffed animal. Badly, out of whatever was in the craft drawer, because she had lost her favorite toy and was crying and he couldn't find the right one. The thing he made was terrible. She clutched it all night anyway. He held Marge's hand in the hospital when she was scared, and he didn't talk, which was the right thing, even though Homer's instinct is always to talk. He apologized. Not always, not as often as he should have. But there were times, real times, in real episodes, with real sincerity when Homer said he was sorry and meant it, and the apology was received, and something that had been broken was slightly repaired. He kept the lights on. He went to the plant every day for decades, to a job that humiliated him and to a boss who despised him, because the lights in the house needed to stay on, and the family needed to eat, and someone had to show up, and he showed up. This is not glamorous. This is not the stuff of heroism narratives. This is the specific, ordinary heroism of the person who does the unglamorous, necessary thing every day because it is necessary. The show knows this. The show honors this. Not loudly, not in speeches about what it means to be a provider or a father or a responsible person. Quietly, in the texture of the life the show depicts, in the specific fact that the family is still there, that the house is still standing, that the children still have a father who comes home at night. Homer is not a good father by most standards that we use to evaluate fathers, but he is a present one, and presence imperfect, inconsistent, sometimes infuriating presence is more than many fathers manage. The show knows this too. It knows that the bar is low and that Homer clears it, just barely, most of the time, and that just barely clearing the bar is what the show is actually about. The things Homer did right are not interesting because they are extraordinary. They are interesting because they are ordinary, because they are the things that anyone could do and that many people don't, and the show treats them with the same seriousness it treats Homer's spectacular failures, not more, not less. Just, this happened. This counted. This was something. The Saturday morning when Homer and Bart watched cartoons together, just the two of them, eating cereal and not talking about anything important, is as real in the show's emotional economy as the nuclear disaster that nearly destroyed the town in the same season. Both things happened. Both things were Homer. The man contains both. Most people do. Section 19. What Bart taught us. There is a generation of children who grew up watching Bart Simpson and learned something from him that they could not have learned from the good children of other shows. The children who were clever and kind and did their homework and helped their parents and served as models of what children were supposed to be, they learned that it was okay to be angry at the institutions that had failed them. Not just to be funny angry, not just to perform the anger as comedy, not just to make the anger safe by laughing at it, to be actually angry. To recognize that the systems around you were not designed with your benefit in mind, and to respond to that recognition with something other than compliance. Bart's resistance to Springfield Elementary is not admirable in any simple sense. It costs him. It produces consequences that make his life more difficult than it needed to be. The show is honest about the costs. But the resistance itself, the refusal to pretend that the institution was doing what it claimed to be doing, the refusal to perform gratitude for a system that was not serving him, is something real, something the show treats as real, something that a significant number of children watching recognized as the correct response to their own experience of similar systems. The educational system, as Bart experienced it and as the show depicted it, was not designed for children like Bart. This is true of the fictional Springfield Elementary, and it is true of real American public schools, which are designed to produce certain kinds of outcomes and which systematically underserve children whose capabilities and learning styles and needs do not fit the design. Bart was the show's portrait of what that underservice looks like from the inside, from the child's perspective, from the experience of being processed as a problem rather than developed as a person. This portrait mattered to real children in the real world because it named something they were experiencing. The child who was being processed as a problem could watch Bart and recognize, this is what this looks like. This is not something wrong with me. This is something wrong with the system. The system is doing this, not my inadequacy. My inadequacy is what the system is telling me I am. The system is wrong. That is a significant thing to learn from a cartoon. It is also, arguably, one of the most politically important things that a piece of popular entertainment aimed at children has ever communicated, and it was communicated so effectively, so vividly, so hilariously, that it bypassed the cultural immune system that would normally have prevented anything so subversive from reaching the audience it reached. George H.W. Bush wanted children to be more like the Waltons and less like the Simpsons. He understood, correctly, that Bart was teaching children something that the institutional structures of American society would prefer they not know. The problem, from the institutional perspective, with children who recognize that they are being failed by institutions, is that such children are harder to manage. They ask questions. They refuse to comply. They make demands. They see through the performance of authority. Bart made a generation of children harder to manage. This was one of the show's greatest achievements. Section 20, The Night Shift. There is a specific register of The Simpsons that only comes through if you watch the show late at night, alone in the quiet of a house that is otherwise asleep. The episodes that were written for that viewing context, not consciously, not with that specific audience in mind, but with a sensibility that somehow aligns with the late-night quiet, are not the funniest episodes or the most formally inventive. They are the ones that have, in their emotional texture, something that the bustle of regular viewing obscures. A slowness, a willingness to sit with something rather than move past it. Homer watching television late at night when the rest of the family is asleep has always been, within the show's grammar, a specifically loaded image. He is in his house. He is in his life. The world outside is dark and quiet, and the plant is not demanding anything from him, and Marge is asleep, and the children are asleep, and for a few hours, in the specific piece of the late-night couch, Homer is just himself. Not Homer the incompetent safety inspector, or Homer the failing husband, or Homer the exasperating father. Just the man, alone with his thoughts, or more accurately, alone with the absence of thoughts, which is its own kind of peace. The show understands this moment because the people who made it understood it. Writers write late at night. They know the specific quality of the late-night quiet, the way the ordinary pressures of the day lift, the way things that seemed urgent at 3 p.m. seem less urgent at midnight. They wrote for this moment, and watching the show in this moment reveals layers that the distraction of daytime viewing obscures. The gentler episodes, the ones that move slowly, that hold their emotional moments for longer than necessary, that end on images rather than jokes, are at their best in the late-night context. Moaning Lisa, which we have discussed, is an episode that rewards the late-night quiet. Homer versus Patty and Selma, with its specific dignity, lands differently at midnight than it does at 8 p.m. Mother Simpson, which ends without a joke, on Homer's face and the stars, is an episode that the late-night quiet holds most honestly. There is also something about the cartoon format itself that is particularly suited to late-night viewing. The animation, which can seem too bright and too loud in the context of daytime television, takes on a different quality in the dark. The bright yellows become warmer, less garish. The specific color palette of Springfield, the yellow family against the blue and gray and brown of the town feels, at night, less like primary colors and more like something closer to how memory works, slightly simplified from reality, slightly idealized, the specific vividness of things we have held for a long time. And there is the sound. The specific sound of the show Marge's voice, Homer's voice, the theme music, the sound design of Springfield has a quality that fills the late-night quiet in a particular way. Not loudly, not obtrusively. It fits itself into the quiet the way a familiar voice fits itself into the silence of a house you know well. It is comfortable. It is the sound of a place you have been many times. It is the sound of going home. This is what the show has been, for many people who grew up with it. The sound of going home. Not literally, not to a specific place, but to a feeling, the feeling of being in a familiar world where the rules are known and the people are recognizable, and the love, however imperfect, is real. Springfield is a home in that sense. Not a house. A home. The thing that holds you. You can always go back. The episodes are still there. Homer is still on the couch. Marge is in the kitchen or asleep or watching television beside him. The children are in their rooms, growing up at the rate of not at all, preserved in amber in the specific ages they were when you first met them. Go back whenever you need to. The late-night Springfield is always available. The quiet is always there. The warmth is always there. Underneath the comedy and the dysfunction and the spectacular failure and the imperfect love, the warmth is always there. Section 21. What we owe Springfield. The Simpsons has given a great deal to the people who watched it. It is worth thinking about what, if anything, we owe in return. This might seem like a strange question. We don't owe a television show anything. Television shows are products produced by companies to generate revenue, and the exchange is commercial. We watch, they show advertisements, everyone goes home. The sentimental attachment we form to television shows is, from a strictly economic perspective, a product design feature rather than a genuine relationship. But the show did something that goes beyond the commercial transaction. It put truth into the world's specific, hard-won truth about human experience, and it did this at a time and in a form that made the truth accessible to people who might not have encountered it elsewhere. For children who grew up in households like the Simpson household, who did not read literature and did not have parents who talked about feelings and did not have access to the kinds of cultural resources that make emotional vocabulary available, The Simpsons was sometimes the most sophisticated emotional text in their environment. This is not the show's intention. The show was not designed as a substitute for literature or therapy or the kind of sustained emotional engagement that a healthy childhood provides. But for some people, it functioned that way. It named things. It gave forms to feelings. It said, "The thing you are experiencing has a shape, and the shape looks like this." What we owe, in return for this, is the same kind of honesty. The same willingness to look at difficult things and not flinch from them. The same refusal to simplify what is genuinely complicated. The same willingness to hold comedy and sorrow together without insisting that one cancels the other. We owe it to the show to be honest about what it was, not just the cultural phenomenon, not just the memes and the catchphrases and the 25 years of decline narrative, but the actual thing, the specific episodes, the specific scenes that told the truth about working-class life and family love and institutional failure and what it costs to keep going. We owe it that kind of attention. And we owe it to the people the show was about, the Homer Simpsons and Marge Simpsons and Bart Simpsons and Lisa Simpsons of the actual world, the people whose lives the show was depicting, to recognize that depicting was not the same as endorsing, that the show was showing you the weight that people carry without suggesting the weight should not be lighter, that the picture of Homer's grief and Marge's invisible labor and Bart's institutional failure was a diagnosis rather than a prescription. The show told you what Springfield looked like. The show told you what the weight looked like. What you do with that information, whether it prompts you to think about the institutions and economic structures that produce Springfield, whether it changes the way you see the people around you who are carrying similar weights, whether it simply provides the comfort of recognition, that is yours to decide. But the first debt is the simplest one. The first debt is attention. The show paid attention close, sustained, honest attention to a world that American popular culture has historically been content to use as a backdrop without really looking at. We owe it the same. Pay attention to Springfield. Not as a nostalgia object, not as a cultural artifact to be curated and ranked and debated, as a place that was honestly depicted, as a world where real things happened to people who were real in the ways that matter, real in their feelings, real in their failures, real in their love. That world is still there. The episodes are still available. The truth they contain is still true. Pay attention to it. That is what we owe. Coda. The last thing the saxophone says, let us end where we began, but from a different angle. The Simpsons premiered on the 17th of December 1989. It was a Sunday night. The Simpsons roasting on an open fire. A man fails to get his Christmas bonus and fails to make enough money as a department store Santa and fails to win enough at the racetrack and comes home with a dog instead of presents. And the family gathers around the dog, and it is a good Christmas anyway. This is what the show has always been saying in the 35 years since that night. The version where you get everything you were hoping for is not the story. The story is the version where you don't, and you come home anyway, and the family is there, and it is enough. It is not always enough in the ways that we would like it to be. The dog is not the presents. The racetrack winnings were not available. Homer is still who he is, and the plant is still what it is, and the situation is still what it is, and all the ways in which the situation is not what it should be are still real, and the family is there, and the dog is there, and it is Sunday night, and the show is on, and for 22 minutes you are in Springfield, where the weight is acknowledged and the warmth is present, and the music at the end of the episode is just slightly too tender for a comedy, as it has always been just slightly too tender for a comedy, as it was designed to be. The saxophone says, I am here, I am playing. The notes are going up, they are reaching for something. I do not know what the something is, and I may not reach it, but I am playing anyway, because the playing is the thing. The playing is what I am for. The playing is the only answer I have to the question of what to do with all of this. The weight and the warmth and the love and the grief and the yellow skin and the four fingers and the floating timeline and the Springfield that is every town and no town and always exactly here under the same stars, making the same music, reaching, always reaching. The notes go up. Springfield is still there. Good night. End of script. Section 22. The specific geography of heartbreak. Every long-running story about a place develops a geography of heartbreak, specific locations within the world that accumulate emotional weight over the years until they mean more than their physical description. The corner where the accident happened. The bar where the bad news was delivered. The kitchen where the argument finally broke something that couldn't be unbroken. The bench in the park where you sat and understood for the first time that things were going to be different now. Springfield has this geography, and it is one of the things that makes the town feel like a real place rather than a constructed backdrop. The power plant is the obvious entry point. We have discussed it at length. The ways in which it functions as the economic and environmental center of Springfield's life, the ways in which Homer's presence inside it is both the source of his security and the site of his ongoing humiliation. But the plant is also, physically, a piece of Springfield's landscape that carries the weight of everything we know about it. When the show cuts to a wide shot of Springfield and the plant is visible on the skyline, those cooling towers against the gray-blue sky, the image carries everything we know about what it means. The plant and its violations and its history and its specific relationship to Homer's life and the town's contamination, all of that is in the shot. All of that is visible, if you know where to look. The Simpsons house at 742 Evergreen Terrace carries its own weight. It is a house that is always slightly in need of repair. The gutters are loose, the yard is imperfectly maintained, the interior has the specific quality of a space that is cared for by someone who is doing everything else at the same time, and so cannot give the house the attention it needs. This imperfect maintenance is a portrait of the family inside it. The house looks the way it does because the family it contains is what it is, loving and chaotic and stretched thin and doing its best. The physical state of the house is the physical state of the family's condition. The specific room that carries the most emotional weight within the house is the kitchen. This is Marge's room in the most direct sense. She spends more time there than anywhere else, and the kitchen is where her labor is most visible and most legible as labor. But it is also the room where the family comes together in the ways that families come together around food, the dinner table, the shared meals, the specific ritual of eating together that is one of the most basic forms of family communion. The kitchen is where Homer and Marge have some of their most honest conversations, the ones that happen in the in-between spaces of daily life when the guard is slightly down. The kitchen is where you find out how things actually are. The school is its own geography. Springfield Elementary is the site of Bart's defeat and Lisa's isolation and the specific institutional failures that the show chronicles across seasons. But it is also, in moments, the site of small redemptions, the extra point on the test, the moment when a teacher sees something, the day when the school serves a purpose it was ostensibly designed to serve. The building is not evil. It is the product of underfunding and administrative exhaustion, and a theory of education that does not serve all children equally, and it carries the specific sadness of institutions that were built with good intentions and have failed to live up to them through no single person's fault and everyone's collective failure. Moe's Tavern is the geography of consolation, or at least the attempt at consolation. It is where Homer and his friends go to be together in the specific way that people who are not quite getting what they need from their lives go to be together not to solve anything, not to improve anything, just to be with other people who are also not quite getting what they need, and to find in that shared inadequacy something that functions as warmth. Moe's is a sad place that is also a good place, which is true of many of the most important places in any life. The church is Springfield Presbyterian, and it is the geography of obligation mixed with genuine need, and the place where the community gathers to perform rituals that they may or may not fully believe in the presence of a minister who is more exhausted than inspired, and where occasionally, in the gaps between the performance, something real is felt. Ned feels it most consistently, though the show sometimes suggests he is feeling something that others in the congregation would feel if they were paying attention. Homer, in the episode where he stops going, feels something in his backyard that might be the same thing the church is designed to produce, accessed through a different channel. The cemetery is where the show goes to acknowledge what it usually refuses to acknowledge: that death is real, that people are gone, that the permanent present tense is a fiction that coexists with the permanent fact of loss. The Simpsons visits to the cemetery, Mona Simpson visiting the grave she thinks is Homer's, Homer finding his mother's absence at the grave she was supposed to occupy, are among the most disorienting moments in the series, because the cemetery is the one place in Springfield where the floating timeline cannot quite hold. The dead stay dead, even in Springfield. The dates on the headstones do not change. And there is the couch. The living room couch, the central gathering place, the site of the family's repeated reassembly. The couch is where the family comes together at the end of every episode, in the couch gag that has been the show's ritual from the beginning. No matter what happened in the 22 minutes before, no matter how catastrophic or comic or emotionally difficult, the family ends up on the couch, together, still there. The couch is Springfield's most powerful geographical fact. It is the answer to everything the episode raised. The family is still assembled. The love is still present. The house is still standing, imperfectly, waiting to be repaired. Section 23. The show within the show. The Simpsons has always been aware that it is a television show being watched by people watching television. This meta-awareness is one of the show's most consistent and least discussed characteristics, and it operates at multiple levels simultaneously. At the most obvious level, the show is full of television. The characters watch television, reference television, talk about television, live their lives in relationship to television, in the way that late 20th century Americans live their lives in relationship to television. Homer watches football, Bart watches Krusty. Lisa watches nature documentaries and political programs and the occasional cartoon. The television in The Simpsons' living room is as much a character in the show as any person, a constant presence, always on, always offering its particular version of the world. The show within the show, primarily the Krusty the Clown Show, and its affiliated programming functions as Springfield's primary cultural institution, the source from which many residents take their cues about what is funny, what is acceptable, what the world is like. Krusty, as we have discussed, is a figure whose real life is very different from his public persona. And the gap between the two is the show's clearest statement about the distance between what mass entertainment presents and what the reality behind it is. But the more interesting meta level is the show's awareness of itself as a television show, its occasional acknowledgement of its own conventions and constraints, its willingness to play with the grammar of the sitcom format in ways that reveal the grammar as a grammar rather than as simply how things are. The couch gag is the most sustained expression of this. By varying the format of the opening sequence, the show constantly reminds the audience that the sequence is a format, that the family rushing to the couch is a construction, that the whole thing is made. This is not alienating. It is, in its way, reassuring. The show is honest about what it is. It does not pretend to be a window into reality. It is a made thing that is also true, and it keeps reminding you of the madeness as part of the truth. The Treehouse of Horror episodes are the most explicit version of this. Episodes that explicitly step outside the show's normal continuity, that operate in a different generic register, that kill and resurrect characters without consequence, because the episodes are avowedly not continuous with the main narrative. The Treehouse of Horror is the show saying, "The rest of this we are trying to make true. This part we are just playing." The distinction itself is a form of respect for the seriousness of the main narrative. The show's reflexive awareness extends to its own decline. There are episodes in the later seasons that acknowledge, sometimes directly and sometimes obliquely, that the show is not what it was. A character will reference an episode from the early seasons in a way that implicitly acknowledges the difference in quality. The show will parody its own conventions in ways that suggest awareness of how formulaic those conventions have become. This reflexivity is not redemptive. It does not make the weaker episodes better to know the show knows it is weaker. But it is honest, and honesty is what the show has always been trying for. The most remarkable instance of the show's self-awareness is the relationship between the show's content and the experience of watching it over decades. The show has been on long enough that people have had entire life experiences in relationship to it. They watched it as children, then as teenagers, then as adults, then as parents. They have watched the same episodes at different ages and found different things in them, because they were different people by then. The show did not change. They changed. And the show, in being the stable thing they returned to as they changed, became something like a record of their own development. This is a specific thing that long-running television can do that other forms of storytelling cannot. It can be a witness to the viewer's life in real time, because the viewer and the show are both moving through time together. The show ages, or in Springfield's case, officially doesn't age alongside the viewer. The episodes from 20 years ago are documents of who you were when you first watched them. Watching them now is watching them with the full knowledge of everything that has happened since, and that knowledge changes what you see. This is the deepest level of the show's meta-awareness, not its awareness of itself as a television show, but its accidental awareness of the relationship it develops with viewers over decades. It did not plan to be a companion to someone's entire adult life, but it has been that for many people. And the fact of it being that, the fact of Springfield being a constant presence in a life that has changed enormously in every other respect, is itself a kind of meaning. Not the meaning the show intended, the meaning that accumulated anyway, the way the most important meanings usually accumulate, without being asked for, without being fully understood, simply there like Springfield itself. When you turn on the television on a Sunday night, Section 24. Everything the show never said. There is a vast amount that The Simpsons never said directly. It never said, the American working class is being systematically exploited by an economic system that is designed to benefit the few at the expense of the many. It never said, the nuclear power plant is poisoning the town and the owner knows it and has calculated that the profit is worth the human cost. It never said, children like Bart are failed by schools because the schools are underfunded, because the people with money and political power have decided that the education of working-class children is not worth the investment. It never said any of these things directly. It showed them. It put them in front of you in the specific, embodied form of people living inside the conditions they describe, and it let you do the work of understanding what you were looking at. This is the specific quality of great social realism, and I think The Simpsons, at its best, qualifies as social realism in the most important sense. Even given its cartoon form, its floating timeline, It's impossible physics that it trusts the audience to make the connections. It does not lecture. It does not explain. It puts Homer at the plant, under Burns's sign, and lets you understand what that means. It puts Bart in Mrs. Krabappel's class, and lets you understand what that means. It puts Marge in the kitchen, and lets you understand what that means. The understanding that comes from being shown rather than told is deeper and more durable than the understanding that comes from explanation. You know what you have been told. You feel what you have been shown. And the feeling stays in ways that the knowing does not. Because the feeling is embodied, it lives in you, not just in your head. The Simpsons put Springfield in people's bodies, in the specific way that long-term engagement with a story puts its world in your body. You know Springfield not just cerebrally, but somatically. You have a feeling of what it is like to be there, to live there, to be one of its residents. This is what the show never said, but always communicated, which is everything. Everything it never said about the working class, about institutions, about love, about the specific costs of the specific life. It communicated through the specific forms of Homer's grief and Marge's composure and Bart's rage and Lisa's saxophone. It communicated it through color and music and the specific quality of the Springfield sky in the wide shots that establish the town at the beginning of episodes. It communicated it through the long tradition of small details that accumulate across seasons and decades into the complete portrait of a world. The portrait is there. It has been there since 1989. And everything it shows about what it is to be alive in this specific kind of life, in this specific kind of country, in this specific kind of time is true, whether or not the show ever says so directly. The truth doesn't need to be said. It just needs to be present. And Springfield has been present more consistently and more honestly than almost anything else in American popular culture for a very long time. That presence is the gift. That presence is what we came to this conversation to acknowledge. The show showed us something true about ourselves and about the country we live in, and it did it in a cartoon, with jokes, and we were grateful for the jokes because the jokes made the truth bearable, and we were grateful for the truth because it made us feel less alone. That is everything. That is what storytelling is for. And Springfield is still there. The couch is still there. The family is still assembled. The notes are still going up. End of complete script. Section 25. Why this lasts. There is a version of this conversation that is purely about nostalgia, about the specific warmth of returning to something you loved when you were young, about the comfort of the familiar, about the way a show that was part of your childhood remains available as a kind of shelter from the complexity of adult life. That version is real. Nostalgia is a real thing, and it is not a trivial thing. The specific pleasure of returning to Springfield, of recognizing the town, the characters, the rhythms of the show is a genuine pleasure, and it deserves to be named and honored rather than dismissed as mere sentiment. But the lasting power of The Simpsons is not only nostalgia, and distinguishing what is from what is not nostalgia in this case matters, because the distinction tells you something about what the show actually did and why it deserves the extended attention we have given it here. Nostalgia is the warmth of return. What persists in The Simpsons beyond nostalgia is the warmth of recognition, not the recognition of a familiar place, but the recognition of a true thing. The scene on the edge of Bart's bed in the dark is not nostalgic, unless you happen to have been a parent who has had that specific conversation with your child. It is something more than nostalgic. It is accurate. It captures the specific texture of a real kind of human experience, the conversation that fails to happen between a frightened parent and a child who has learned to protect himself from sincerity, and it captures it so precisely that it continues to land, regardless of whether you watched it at 9 years old or 40. The accuracy is the lasting thing. Accuracy does not age. The loneliness of Lisa's experience at Springfield Elementary does not age. The specific weight of Marge's invisible labor does not age. The particular grief of Homer's relationship with Abe does not age. These things are depicted with an accuracy that is not contingent on any specific historical moment. They are accurate to human experience in ways that remain accurate as the specific historical details around them change. This is what separates great storytelling from competent storytelling. Competent storytelling captures the surface of its moment accurately enough to be satisfying in that moment. Great storytelling captures something underneath the surface, something about the structure of human experience, The specific shapes that joy and grief and love and loss take when they occur in particular kinds of lives that remains accurate across moments. The Simpsons, in its best years, did the second kind of storytelling. It was accurate about the surface, about the specific cultural moment, the specific economic conditions, the specific texture of American working-class life in the 1990s, and it was accurate about the depths, about what it is to carry grief quietly, about what it costs to hold a family together, about the specific loneliness of a child who is too intelligent for the world she inhabits, about the specific dignity of a man who does the humiliating thing because it is required. These depths are what last. The surface changes, and the show changes with it, and the later seasons are more of the surface and less of the depths, which is part of why they don't last in the same way. But the depths of the golden age are still there, available in the episodes, waiting for the viewer who brings enough attention to find them. That is why we are still talking about this show. That is why the think pieces and the retrospectives and the long video essays and the conversations about what it meant and what it was continue to be written and watched and discussed. Because the depths are there. Because the accuracy persists. Because something in those episodes is still true. And truth, in story as in everything else, is the only thing that reliably lasts. The Simpsons lasted. It is still lasting. And it will keep lasting, in the way that accurate depictions of real experience last not forever, not unchanged, but long enough to keep finding new viewers who recognize themselves in it, who feel the specific relief of being understood by something that was made before they were born or before they were old enough to understand what they were watching. That is the gift. That is the whole gift. Springfield was a true place. It was true about the things that mattered. And the truth is still there, in the yellow light of the living room and the notes of the saxophone going up into the Springfield night, reaching for something just out of reach, the way the best things always reach for something just out of reach. The reaching is the whole point. Good night. End of complete script. Fall asleep to 4 hours of Simpsons. Details that prove the show was never actually a comedy. Appendix. On the act of watching. We should say something at the very end about the specific act of watching The Simpsons, not the show as a cultural artifact or as a social document, but the physical, temporal, particular act of sitting down and pressing play and spending 22 minutes in Springfield. This act is, for many people who grew up with the show, so familiar that it has become invisible. You don't think about watching The Simpsons, you just watch it. The show has been so thoroughly absorbed into the texture of everyday life, for the generation that grew up with it, that the watching is as automatic as any other habitual comfort. You watch it when you're tired. You watch it when you're anxious. You watch it when you want to be somewhere familiar without having to go anywhere. But the act deserves attention, because what happens in those 22 minutes is not nothing. You enter a world, a specific world, with specific rules and specific people, and a specific quality of light. You know this world. You have spent hours and hours in it, across the years. The knowing is in your body. You recognize Springfield the way you recognize a neighborhood you grew up in, through a combination of visual recognition and something more physical, a sense of having been somewhere before that is deeper than simple memory. You spend time with people you have been spending time with for years. Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa are not your friends in any real sense. They are fictional characters, animated drawings, constructions of ink and sound. And yet they are present to you in ways that many real people are not. You know their voices. You know their specific rhythms of speech. You know how they respond to things, what makes them happy, and what makes them sad, and what makes them do the wrong thing for the right reasons and the right thing for the wrong reasons. You know them in the specific way that long familiarity produces knowing, and the knowing is real even if its object is fictional. You follow a story, even if you have seen it before. Even the most rewatched episodes maintain their hold because story, in the human nervous system, is not simply information to be processed once and stored. Story is an experience to be had, and the experience is available again each time you enter it, changed by what you know now that you didn't know before but still present, still available, still the thing it was the first time. And at the end of the 22 minutes, something has happened to you. Not a dramatic transformation, not a revelation, something quieter and more durable. You have spent time in a world that was honest about things that most worlds are not honest about, and the honesty has done something to you. Made you slightly more present to your own life, perhaps. Made the weight you carry slightly more nameable. Reminded you that the love you have for the people in your life, however imperfect, is real. That is what watching does. That is what 22 minutes in Springfield does. And it is enough. It has always been enough. The show knew this about itself. The show has always known that what it was offering was not escape, but recognition. Not the avoidance of difficulty, but the company of something honest in the middle of it. Come and watch, it said. Come and sit with Homer and Marge and their kids. Come and see something true. Come and feel something real. You can go back to your life after, but come here first, for a little while. We came, we keep coming. The show is still there when we do. That is the whole of it. That is what 35 years of Sunday nights in Springfield has been. That is what this conversation has been trying to name, across all these sections and all these words and all these attempts to say clearly what the show has always communicated obliquely in the specific emotional language of comedy and music, and the voices of people who lived inside these characters long enough to know them as well as you know yourself. It was true. It was honest. It cared about the people it depicted and the people watching the depiction. It made something that lasts. It is still here. Go watch it. Go home to Springfield. The family is waiting. They are always waiting.